while crowds of people adopt all the technical developments, we can only provide substantial freedom at an individual level. This is a true artisan's work. I am fully convinced that my slow intellectual labor, involving small numbers of people, is actually a point of departure for an internal change in society. Confronted with the phenomenon of technique and the new technological configurations we live in, we must have mutants. Not the mutants or robotic beings of science fiction, but quite the opposite. To be a mutant, a person needs to become someone who can use techniques and at the same time not be used by, assimilated by, or subordinated to them. This implies a development of the intellect and a development of consciousness which can come about only for individuals, but it is the only development possible. This leads, obviously, to the problem of educating children. For a longer or shorter period, our children and grandchildren will be living in a technological society, and we cannot even for 1 second imagine that we can raise them without some contact with it. Once again, the point is not to refuse to admit that technique exists, because it does exist. It is our environment. When historical societies organized, small groups or sometimes individual people absolutely refused to change, saying, "We want to keep living like monkeys in the forest." Of course, they could do so, rejecting the development of society. But this was no solution. Those who continued living in the forest became extinct. In the same way, one cannot claim that we can go on living as in the 19th century. We cannot bring up our children as though they were ignorant of technique, as though they had not been introduced from the first into a world dominated by technique. If we tried to do that, we would make total misfits of our children, and their lives would be impossible. They would then be highly vulnerable to the powers of technology. Yet we cannot wish them to be pure experts on technology and gadgets, making them so well fit for the society dominated by technique that they are totally devoid of what has until now been considered human. Hence, I think that on the one hand we must teach them, prepare them to live in the technological environment and at the same time against it. We must teach them whatever is necessary to live in this world and, at the same time, to develop a critical awareness of the modern world. This is a very delicate balance, and we should not delude ourselves. We are preparing a world that will be even harder to live in for our children than it is for us. For us it is already complicated, and our children will be forced to deal with even more difficult situations. Our children are indeed going to have difficult problems. Hence, in the immediate future, I feel that our children should be like all the others, go to the same schools as everyone else. But, at the same time, we should try to set up an alternative school, as it were, a parallel institution, where children learn to live differently and, on an existential level, learn to question the certitudes taught them in regular schools.
The French sociologist Jacques Ellul wrote a book called Propaganda, and the little banner under which his book flew, which is printed right on the frontispiece, is he says, there are no political solutions, only technological ones. The rest is propaganda. And then he spends 200 pages explaining what he means by political solutions, technological solutions, and propaganda. By Ellul's understanding, I agree. I think ideology is toxic. All ideology. It's not that there are good ones and bad ones. All ideology is toxic because ideology is a kind of insult to the gift of human free thinking. I mean, if you adopt some ideology, Leninism, Mormonism, it doesn't matter, then you have all the answers. You just go and look in the catechism. Well, I don't know why they issued you a brain. They could have just given you the catechism. Technology, as the counterpoint to ideology, is a very different animal. There are ideas, personalities, technologies available right now which, if honestly explored and implemented could rescue the human enterprise from the disgrace that hovers over us. And it's up to each one of us to relate to this situation in a fashion that will allow us to answer the question that will surely be put to us in some point in the future, which is, what did you do to help save the world?
In the case of the solar warrior, the idea is to synthesize the material and the spiritual, and to create that synthesis first within and then project it into society.
As the first generation of the technological society, we have been acted upon by forces of such power that few, if any of us, can understand. Extensive information gathering on every American, human experiments with drugs and psychosurgery, electronic surveillance, the era of the computer, invasion of privacy, growing government and corporate power over our lives, a people plagued by dehumanization, loneliness, and violence. Dramatic? Perhaps. But we are losing control of our technology and our lives. Not so long ago, people in a similar situation did not awaken to the forces around them. Are we so unwise as to do the same?
Behavior control, changing drugs, LEAA, paranoia, enemy list, wiretap, data banks, dossiers, medical records, social security number, credit record, national security.
I won't lie to you, it's a very lucrative business. Making people feel good about being green is great. People feel threatened by global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it, and I make them look and feel better. So as a quick summary, my company has a whole team of graphic designers, eco-writers, environmentalists, scientists, that we can use to rebrand your company and make you look very, very green.
So here, we wanted to show you guys what we are the most proud of at Destiny USA. If you can see behind us, is going to be the future green capital of America, which is just fantastic. And
we were able to truly, utterly, just sensory perception-wise, come into this blank palette and manipulate everything that the consumer experiences about this location.
So everybody that comes here, we change the image so that people no longer see a huge monolith, overly lavish and expansive mall. People see the green capital of America.
We believe that every client has the right to make money, and we provide the resource and facility for them to do that. We believe that is what they want, and that is good for them, it's good for us, it's win-win for everybody, and it enables us to regard ourselves as outstanding citizens and sleep well at night, go to bed each evening feeling good about ourselves.
We provide a civic duty to citizens, not just companies and what they're trying to make money for, but we actually make people better people because they have green in their lives from the companies and the products that they're buying. So that's what we're hoping to come away with today.
The Earth has reached a worrying new milestone. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have reached the symbolic threshold of 400 parts per million on average across the whole of 2015 and may not dip below that level for many generations. The World Meteorological Organization, which released the findings, is sounding the alarm, saying that without tackling carbon dioxide emissions, the promises made in Paris to reduce global warming won't be kept.
past few decades, a new generation of consumer culture has grown, one which is self-conscious about making choices during shopping about food and other products. This consciousness has resulted in a demand for eco, bio, and green products. When companies realized this demand, they decided to emphasize the green side of their products, which led to a different style of advertisement and PR. Some companies chose the hard green way, a systematic reworking of internal mechanisms. However, the majority took the easier and cheaper solution, changing only the face of the company. The question we are presented with is, are the products we are buying truly eco-friendly, or are they just the same old products in a new packaging? As consumers, we have realized that we are voting for brands and companies with every dollar spent. Conscious consumers want to choose ethically responsible companies and trademarks. That's why companies are interested in building up new, green, ethical, environmentally friendly appearance, including the use of fallacies, denying bibliographic sources, forcing half-truth, demagogical rhetoric, and the manipulation of opinions through human emotions. Once people come to realize that they are being misled in terms of the validity of their ecological products, they lose faith in all green consumer solutions. It's no wonder that 70% of American consumers think that to call a product green is just a marketing bluff made by companies. So let us give you some examples. Nowadays, you have probably heard about genetically modified organizations, or GMOs. Without exception, the species that are modified genetically are registered property of the big agro companies that have parented them. It's a manipulation of nature and commodification of DNA, the substance of life. BP, one of the world's largest multinational oil companies, has spent millions of dollars creating newer and newer eco-friendly facades. Beginning in 1990, BP spent $100 million on a campaign that advertised the fuel as not emitting any harmful particles. In an effort to make the name less obviously fossil fuel related, they shortened it from British Petroleum to BP. Then, in 2000, BP spent $200 million on a new campaign to change their name from BP to Beyond Petroleum. In 2010, all of these greenwashings were revealed when the oil spill catastrophe happened in the Gulf of Mexico. After, BP attempted to buy Google and Yahoo keywords for searchings on this topic, revealing BP's fear of the deterioration of their green face. They spent $10,000 per day on those keywords, money that could have been more responsibly spent on cleaning up the real disaster. In Hungary, there is an organization called Climate Club. From the name, one would assume that it works to alleviate climate change. However, the truth is that the biggest sponsors of this club are the power plants that actually have a big course on climate change. These sponsors include the biggest Hungarian electricity supplier, Hungarian Power Companies Ltd., the Hungarian Paks nuclear power plant, Magrai Power Plant Ltd., which is a coal-based power plant, and the covering company, which includes founder members from Bayer and Monsanto, two big famous genetically modified food producers. Corporate social responsibility, or CSR, is a commonly used term that refers to the branch of a company that has control of the PR in connection to the environment. Nowadays, most companies have a CSR program. However, what does this mean in terms of actual accountability? Ideally, CSR would be the large company's answer to the questionings of ethics and social responsibility posed by civil and state powers. But in this, CSR programs seem to fall short. As previously mentioned, it is a good idea, but nowadays it is just used to make the company's face greener and to hide the details of unsustainable functions and routines. Ideally, CSR should mean for the company to adjust to questioning capitalism, to adapt to the fact of non-limitless growing, and to be fully responsible for the society and the environment. Nowadays, the company's CSR is poorly used just to recycle some products sometimes, to prove that they use both sides of paper in the offices, and to make some charity events. Be suspicious of all environmental claims. Don't trust anything unless you have verified them yourself. Look out for poor use of scientific facts, especially when listening to politicians. Reducing carbon emissions will protect the ozone layer. This technology is sustainable. Emissions can be offset. The greenhouse effect is not certain, etc. All examples of rubbish that has no basis in fact, even the last one. Think about it. Look out for buzzwords that put a gloss on reality. Carbon intensity, sustainable development, carbon offsets, clean technology, etc. Another clear sign that something is being covered up.
Enlightenment is an incredibly destructive process. It's painful and destructive. It destroys the facade. It requires us to throw away everything we've believed to be true. Not many people want to do that. It became clear to me that I could no longer speak out about the atrocities of imperialism while living at the apex of empire. Tucson, Arizona gets all its water pumped uphill across the desert several hundred miles. How do we do that? How do we get the fossil fuels to pump that water across the desert in open canals so that we get salty water? We get it the same way we always have. We go to other countries and kill people for it. You can't live at the apex of empire, point out that you're living at the apex of empire, continue to live at the apex of empire, and you look yourself in the mirror every day. You just can't. I defer to Upton Sinclair in his quote from about 100 years ago. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon him not understanding it. Conventional oil peaked in 2005, 2006. And he said, ever since then, you think you're terrified? You think you're informed and you're terrified that the system's coming down? They're even more scared than you are. He said, and here's the punchline, they're juggling chickens and chainsaws, trying to hold the system together for another day. They're in control. We think they're in control. We just assume somebody is the Wizard of Oz pulling the levers behind the screen. But they've been out of control for a while. They're throwing money at the situation in the form of the Federal Reserve Bank printing money or creating digits out of thin air. But they admit that the whole situation with respect to industrial civilization is out of their hands. They're throwing everything they got at it. But at this point, it's just our faith in the system that allows the system to persist. Apparently, we're all children in this society, so the corporate media and the corporate governments can't trust us with the information that's actually out there. So it doesn't get put out there. I think it's a tragedy. You think the corporate media and the corporate governments of the world don't know what I know? Of course they know. You think anybody's going to go on television and tell you this? No way. I was interviewed by Tom Hartman a couple of years ago on RT and also by Abby Martin at RT. And I told them both about the evidence I've collected, and they won't speak to me anymore. So that seems a little problematic to me, that we don't believe observations, but instead we think models have all the answers. If only a few million people understood how dire the situation is, they might live in the manner I've suggested. And then the whole house of cards come down like the house of cards it is. How can you tell if a politician is lying? Yeah, his lips are moving. I suspect you're going to derive joy from different things than this culture tells you you're going to derive joy from. You know, we talk about happiness. It's a constitutional right, the pursuit of happiness, which is ridiculous. Happiness is a shallow, superficial, nonsensical phenomenon. We should really be seeking joy instead, which goes a lot deeper. But we're all about happiness. That's like, you know, we buy a toy, so it makes us happy. And then 20 minutes later, we need another one. Where's the joy come from? It doesn't come from the toys. We're here to help each other through this, whatever this is. And why don't we make it fun along the way? Why don't we act like our own individual lives are really not all that important, that we have to show up on the hamster wheel every day to keep the system cranking along? Why don't we act like, you know, we're capable of spending time quietly with the people around us and experiencing that true joy that comes from human companionship? You know, we don't have influence over a lot of people. We have influence over the people we spend significant amount of time with. So let's live with that. Let's let that settle in and treat the people we come across with dignity and respect and compassion.
The essence of the vision of man and life, which is the premise of Americanism and its democracy, is this: that everyone can become what they want to, within the limits of the technological means at their disposal. Equally, a person is not what he is from his true nature, and there is no real difference between people, only differences in qualifications. According to this theory, anyone can be anyone they want to be if they know how to train themselves. This is obviously the case with the self-made man, in a society which has lost all sense of tradition. The notion of personal aggrandizement will extend into every aspect of human existence, reinforcing the egalitarian doctrine of pure democracy. If the basis of such ideas is accepted, then all natural diversity has to be abandoned.
You're here for cosmetic purposes, Bob. You're here to represent research, technical support.
Oh, but I don't have that much experience.
Oh, well, that doesn't matter. You as a person don't really matter, Bob. It's what you represent. Nobody's really here. You think you see people walking around those hallways? You don't. What you see is functions.
Who we are is more important than who we are.
Each person can presume to possess the potential of everyone else, and the terms superior and inferior lose their meaning. Every notion of distance and respect loses meaning. All lifestyles are open to all. To all organic conceptions of life, Americans oppose a mechanistic conception. In a society which has started from scratch, everything has the characteristic of being fabricated. In American society, appearances are masks, not faces. At the same time, proponents of the American way of life are hostile to personality.
His parents had to put him in a mental institution.
Why? What did he do?
What do you mean?
Well, they can't put you away just for saying weird things.
The Americans' open-mindedness, which is sometimes cited in their favor, is the other side of their interior formlessness. The same goes for their individualism. Individualism and personality are not the same. The one belongs to the formless world of quantity, the other to the world of quality and hierarchy. American mind, puerile and primitive, lacks characteristic form and is therefore open to every kind of standardization.
There are people in this world, Bob, who look very official while they're doing what they're doing. And do you know why?
Why?
Because they don't know what they're doing. Because if you know what you're doing, you don't have to look like you know what you're doing. It comes naturally. You follow me?
America is a society of pariahs. There is a role for pariahs. It is to be subjected to beings whose form and internal laws are precisely defined. Instead, the modern pariahs seek to become dominant themselves and to exercise their dominion over all the world.
And that would be great.
The American mentality can only be interpreted as an example of regression, which shows itself in the mental atrophy towards all higher interests and incomprehension of higher sensibility.
Hey, that's how things really are.
The American mind has limited horizons, one conscribed to everything which is immediate and simplistic.
Do yourself a favor, Bob.
What's that?
Don't ever become one of those people.
With the inevitable consequence that everything is made banal, basic and leveled down until it is deprived of all spiritual life.
That means that you preaching Jesus is no different than Larry or anybody else preaching lubricants. It doesn't matter whether you're selling Jesus or Buddha or civil rights or how to make money in real estate with no money down. That doesn't make you a human being. It makes you a marketing rep. Wow.
Wow is right, Bob. Wow sums it up quite nicely.
The much vaunted sex appeal of American women is drawn from films, reviews and pin-ups, and is in large print fictitious. 75% of young American women are without strong sexual feeling, and instead of satisfying their libido they seek pleasure narcissistically in exhibitionism, vanity and the sterile cult of fitness and health. American girls have no hang-ups about sex. They are easygoing for the man who sees the whole sexual process as something in isolation, thereby making it uninteresting and matter-of-fact.
I mean, all these men, they're beautiful, artistic minds, great sex, the whole package, but hollow. You know what I mean? I feel nobody's honest with me. Nobody wants me for me.
Thus, after she has been taken to the cinema or a dance, it is something like American good manners for the girl to let herself be kissed. This doesn't mean anything. American women are characteristically frigid and materialistic. The man who has his way with an American girl is under a material obligation to her.
Oh, Andy, I just love it. This really means something to me. I'll always treasure it as a token.
No, you won't.
American women will divorce readily enough when they see a better bargain.
Lester, I refuse to live like this. This is not a marriage.
Everything I write is so shallow, superficial. Can't anyone see through my work? Its inherent phoniness. I'm just another sordid exploitationist.
I'm no good.
You are nothing. You think you are fucking something, but you are fucking nothing. You are empty. You are a zero. You are a black hole.
In its extreme form, capitalism is a system in which a man's value is estimated solely in terms of the production of merchandise and the invention of the means of production. Socialist doctrines grew out of a reaction to the lack of human consideration in this system. A new phase has begun in the United States where there has been an upsurge of interest in so-called labor relations. In appearance it would seem to signify an improvement. In reality this is a deleterious phenomenon. The entrepreneurs and employers have come to realize the importance of the human factor in a productive economy, and that it is a mistake to ignore the individual involved in industry, his motives, his feelings, his working day life. Thus, a whole school of study of human relations in industry has grown up, based on behaviorism. The sociological investigations go as far as analyzing the employee's social ambience. This kind of study has a practical purpose. The maintenance of the psychological contentment of the employee is as important as the physical. In cases in which a worker is tied to a monotonous job which doesn't demand a great deal of concentration, the studies will draw attention to the danger that his mind may tend to wander in a way that may eventually reflect badly on his attitude towards the job. The private lives of employees are not forgotten, hence the increase in so-called personnel counseling. Specialists are called in to dispel anxiety, psychological disturbances and non-adaptation complexes, even to the point of giving advice in relation to the most personal matters. A frankly psychoanalytic technique and one much used is to make the subject talk freely and put the results obtainable by this catharsis into relief. None of this is concerned with the spiritual betterment of human beings or any real human problems.
Every decision you make, is this good for the company? Am I helping?
American business is a long way from the type of organization which corresponds to the democratic ideal of U.S. propaganda. American businesses have a pyramid structure. They constitute at the top an articulate hierarchy.
Bob is a consultant. Yeah, he's going to be sort of helping us out a little here.
The big businesses are run in the same way as government ministries and are organized along similar lines. They have co-coordinating and controlling bodies which separate the business leaders from the mass of employees.
Oh, and remember, next Friday is Hawaiian Shirt Day.
Rather than becoming more flexible, in a social sense the managerial elite is becoming more autocratic than ever, something not unrelated to American foreign policy. This is the end of yet another American illusion. America, the land of opportunity, where every possibility is there for the person who can grasp it, a land where anyone can rise from rags to riches. Given the ever-increasing specialization of labor in the productive process, and the increasing emphasis on qualifications, what used to seem obvious to Americans, that their children would go further than they would, is for many people no longer obvious at all. If the mask of American democracy were thereby removed, it would become clear to what extent democracy in America is only the instrument of an oligarchy which pursues a method of indirect action, assuring the possibility of abuse and deception on a large scale of those many who accept a hierarchical system. In the United States, man is also seen as just a factor of labor and consumption, and no aspect of his interior life is neglected and every factor of his existence is drawn to the same end. In the land of the free, through every medium, man is told he has reached a degree of happiness hitherto undreamed of. He forgets who he is, where he came from, and basks in the present.
This is the future. The
future of our country we're talking about, after all.
Your children admire you, I'm sure, as we all hope they do. And maybe your wife doesn't know, but I know. And my knowledge forces me to call you on the fact that you are a goddamn cocksucking liar from the word go.
This country is going straight to hell.
One example of a colleague of mine who teaches at Harvard, after 9/11, put an American flag on his car. And his colleague said, "What is that for?" When I visited Berkeley in the aftermath of 9/11, when there were flags everywhere, I did not see one flag on the Berkeley campus, on any of those expensive houses. When I was coming back from Berkeley, the first American flag I saw was in a low-income black neighborhood in Elkland. These are people who consider themselves citizens of the world, and that the rest of us are so lucky to have them here to change America, so that people like us don't have a voice. And of course, the whole way that Obama has operated with these enormous bills that no one has ever had time to read, that they rush through, where they're putting people in power who don't have to go through the confirmation process, so that we don't find out what they're like except by if there's an expose on Fox News or someplace. His whole thing has been to circumvent the American public in order to put in things that they clearly don't want, as shown by the polls, as shown by this recent repudiation in Missouri.
All right, that's a question.
Speaking of the internet, This Is America. I saw you tweeting that you posted on Instagram how much you enjoyed that video.
Yeah, man, it was incredible. I think it's like right on time, honestly. You can watch it 5, 6, 7 times and see something different.
What's your perception? Because that's what we've been asking people all morning.
Honestly, it's I feel like Donald. We were actually kicking it last night. We were hanging out last night. He's in town for the Met and stuff like that. We were singing his praises and stuff all night. Man, we had a good time.
I thought it was a great video. It's well shot, well choreographed. The imagery, I like the dancing and him partying amongst all the bullshit that's going on in our country. We got shootings in church. He's obviously talking about the gun laws.
We really sort of got the flavor of it at some point when you all are near your computers. Check it out, because it's extraordinary. And everybody is talking about this video. And some people are saying, are they going to take the message to heart when they see it? Because the imagery is so extraordinary. There are things we couldn't show you, that you should know about to understand what we're talking about.
Well, in order to understand or to even have a take on this, you have to see the fact that there's violence in here.
We got to talk about Donald Glover shit.
Oh, Childish.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I saw the video, and I was trying to think of how we were going to cover this, because all three of us have been high on him for a long time.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So how do we cover it now that everyone else is singing his praises?
Told you so.
I think it. All right.
Told you the kid was a genius.
And I feel like Donald is the distraction. You know what I'm saying? Childish Gambino. Sorry, Childish Gambino. He's a distraction to what's really going on. You know what I'm saying? In the world right now, just as much as we're distracted by everything else that's going on and not really pay attention to the world around us. So I encourage people to watch the video, but don't look at Childish.
Yeah,
try not to.
Yeah, because you see the pale horse in the background.
Exactly, with the cops.
The cop car following.
You see the kids on their cell phone.
Recording everything, you know what I'm saying?
Well, there's violence, but then, someone gets shot, and the person that gets shot in the video is on the floor. Someone comes along with a pad, like a beautiful pad to have the gun put on, which is kind of saying, we treat the guns better than we treat the people who the guns shoot. So there's a lot of imagery. That's why I say you need to see it.
And all I could think of was, all right, so tell me now where the race is for most talented person in the game. Give me the 1 through wherever you want to go, 3.
I still got Jamie at 1.
Entertainment. Altogether? Yeah, Jamie Foxx is still up there.
I don't know. I don't know if he's Childish right now is number one though.
Oh, like currently? Yeah.
Donald Glover, yeah.
Yeah, he would be number one.
I mean, as
He's got he's got possibly the best show, some of the best music.
Okay, all good. But anyway, you see the way he gun care. You know what I'm saying? Where he put the gun, you know what I'm saying, nightly away, but the body is dragged away. And stuff like that.
Gun into people.
Exactly. So there's a lot of little things in there that I feel like is super important. And he's a genius. Hero is an amazing too, director. There's a lot of and all of his Childish music videos. So yeah, man, it was a good video.
I loved it. I just wish that in that one scene where he shot the choir, I wish it was a white person actually shooting the choir instead of
him.
Donald.
You should see it like 5 times because it's had over 50 million hits, and to see what is going on in all the scenes, you have to watch it a few times. Over and over again. But I found he hit so succinct the polar feelings of getting distracted, and it's fun and it's music, and then something happens and your eyes and your heart deceive you, and you think if you're not paying attention, you're not seeing what's happening. It was so powerful because I couldn't decide how I felt. I was very uncomfortable.
No, I'm on the same page with you.
My list is the same. It's still Donald Glover, Jamie Foxx, Chris Brown.
Chris.
Followed by Drake is in there somewhere. But this did nothing for me. How did like?
I mean, the timing was great.
Well, let me not say that. People, I'm not saying the video did nothing for me. I'm saying this newfound love that everyone seems to have for Donald Glover did nothing for me.
Yeah. It was
supposed
amazing.
to be uncomfortable, I think, when you watch it. And I love the part that he's dancing, and people are looking at the dancing and listening to the music, and they're not looking at all the social commentary. They're not looking at everything else that is happening. And isn't that what we do, unfortunately, many times as Americans? You know, we sort of have the attention span of a gnat. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're moving on to the next shiny thing when there's all of these things, that are going on.
It could have been Teddy Perkins.
Because I feel like people. I don't like the optics of black people killing black people.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it might have been a little bit more like clear of what he's trying to say.
Yeah, because I mean, if you white and you watching that, all you see is
black
people killing black people.
Yeah, I see what
you know what I mean. And it reinforces the negative stereotype you already have of us anyway. But other than that, I thought it was a genius video.
Iconic video. That thing goes down legendary.
So when I see artists who will take a stand about something, whether they're making a political stand or they're making a social stand, I'm happy to see it because it gets lonesome out there sometimes. Well,
And this is the threat to our lives. We all face it. We all operate in our society in relation to a system. Now, is the system going to eat you up and relieve you of your humanity? Or are you going to be able to use the system to human purposes?
Why are there so many stories of the hero or of heroes in mythology?
Well, because that's what's worth writing about. See, this thing communicates. It is in a language that is talking to young people today, and that's marvelous. I don't think it would help you to change the system, but it would help you to live in the system as a human being. And this is the threat to our lives. We all face it. We all operate in our society in relation to a system.
The whole time watching this film.
Now, is the system going to eat you up and relieve you of your humanity?
I mean, like they just always feel dressed up. I think that's you can't go to a baseball game with a cape and have people not be like, what's the fucking king here? Like, what's going on?
Always kind of looks like you might be hiding something.
Yeah. If you were a superhero and you went to a baseball game with a cape, that'd be okay.
But then everybody know you're a superhero, and then it's like
they're like all French.
Yeah. Very French.
It's that thin line.
Yeah, but also the French you don't like, where it's like, oh, this guy.
Yeah, but he doesn't have a Dalmatian.
Couldn't leave the cape at home.
Yeah.
Like, just having a pet underneath.
What does it mean to be part of the Star Wars family?
It's a lot of pressure. But in a good way. Like, because I mean, I love it. I think we loved it on set. It was really, everybody's so supportive. Everybody's so good at their jobs. Like, I just never, the puppeteers, the people make the costumes, like, everybody loves their job and everybody's so good at it. It was really just beautiful to see, and like hanging with other people who just enjoy the story.
And they go out. The producers go out of their way to make you really feel like you're part of a family. Like when we first arrived on set, they take you in. Like we had a tour around the Creatures factory and everything to meet everybody who's like right at the kind of grassroots stage of all these amazing characters, and it's a really tight group, even though there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are part of it.
So, Donald, what a big week for you. The premiere of Solo and obviously Childish Gambino, This Is America video, blowing up. It's huge. Can you explain what's happening at the end of that video?
No. I feel like it's not really my place to do that. I think, I think it's just something that should just be out there and just, you know, it's for the people, you know.
Like, is the idea that a lot of what we're seeing in the video is open for interpretation? I
don't want to give it any context. I feel like that's not my place. I feel like if I do that, it doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel good to everybody. Like, I feel like whatever I make is for the people, like, you know, just like Star Wars. Like, you can watch this movie and walk away with whatever you need to walk away with. And I just feel like,
We originally related our religious feelings to our natural environment. The tree, the fountain, the wind, the animal were the focus. We invested them with a formidable greatness and they became sacred. It used to be nature that imposed its evolutionary rhythm upon us. The relation between man and nature is not merely experienced and practiced in an obscure fashion. It takes on a status of stability, of consistency, which makes it a reality having its own laws and its orderly permanence. It used to be nature that determined certain social structures. Now it is technology. It used to be nature that meted out the raw materials. Now the crux is the technological processing. It used to be nature that required man to establish fixed laws of relations between objects and himself. Now, the objects, emerging from a constantly renewing technological action, are no longer so important. Man no longer lives in touch with the realities of the earth and the water, but with the realities of the instruments and objects forming the totality of his environment. He is now in an environment made of asphalt, iron, cement, glass, plastic, and so on. We know that from his very origins, man has tried to establish a system of nature. He has striven for both a system of relations and an explanatory system. He has often gone awry, with magical or metaphysical explanations and correspondences, but each time, one system replaced another, until he formulated a system of rational relationships that are called scientific. This is precisely the same labor that we have attempted in this light emergence YouTube video, since one of the main dangers of civilization arises from the inability of minds trained in the natural sciences to perceive the difference between the economic and the technical. When man finds himself in an environment that is becoming exclusively technological, the modes of savage, economic or political thinking, which survives as such in man, becomes fairly useless. The old natural environment is not really abandoned in favor of the new technological one. Rather, the new one permeates the old one, engulfs it, utilizes it, but in order to become the phagocyte, disintegrates it like a cancerous tissue proliferating in an earlier non-cancerous one. At a certain level, culture and nature overlap, forming society, and a totality that becomes a nature for man. And into this complex comes a foreign body, intrusive and unreplaceable, the technological order. It does not turn society into a machine. It fashions society in terms of its necessities. The simplest visual example is the way the city world encroaches upon rural areas through the spread of the suburbs. Technique has become the new and specific environment in which man is required to exist, one which has supplanted the old environment, that of nature. This new technical environment has the following characteristics. It is artificial. It is autonomous with respect to values, ideas, and the state. It is in a closed circle. Like nature, it is a closed organization which permits it to be self-determinative independently of all human intervention. It grows according to a process which is causal but not directed to ends. It is formed by an accumulation of means which have established primacy over ends. All its parts are mutually implicated to such a degree that it is impossible to separate them or to settle any technical problem in isolation. The development of the individual techniques is an ambivalent phenomenon. Since technique has become the new environment, all social phenomena are situated in it. It is incorrect to say that economics, politics, in the sphere of the cultural are influenced or modified by technique. They are rather situated in it, a novel situation modifying all traditional social concepts. Politics, for example, is not modified by technique as one factor among others which operate upon it. The political world is today defined through its relation to the technological society. Traditionally, politics formed a part of a larger social whole. At the present the converse is the case. Technique comprises organizational and psychosociological techniques. It is useless to hope that the use of techniques of organization will succeed in compensating for the effects of techniques in general, or that the use of psychosociological techniques will assure mankind ascendancy over the technical phenomenon. In the former case, we will doubtless succeed in averting certain technically induced crises, disorders, and serious social unbalances, but this will but confirm the fact that technique constitutes a closed circle. In the latter case, we will secure human psychic equilibrium in the technological environment by avoiding the psychobiologic pathology resulting from the individual techniques taken singly and thereby attain a certain happiness. But these results will come about through the adaptation of human beings to the technical environment. Psychosociological techniques result in the modification of men in order to render them happily subordinate to their new environment, and by no means imply any kind of human domination over technique. The ideas, judgments, beliefs, and myths of the man of today have already been essentially modified by his technical environment. It is no longer possible to reflect that on the one hand, there are techniques which may or may not have an effect on the human being, and, on the other, there is the human being himself who is to attempt to invent means to master his techniques and subordinate them to his own ends by making a choice among them. Choices and ends are both based on beliefs, sociological presuppositions, and myths which are a function of the technological society. Modern man's state of mind is completely dominated by technical values, and his goals are represented only by such progress and happiness as is to be achieved through techniques. Modern man in choosing is already incorporated within the technical process and modified in his nature by it. He is no longer in his traditional state of freedom with respect to judgment and choice. To understand the problem posed to us, it is first of all requisite to disembarrass ourselves of certain fake problems. First, we make too much of the disagreeable features of technical development, for example, urban overcrowding, nervous tension, air pollution, and so forth. I am convinced that all such inconveniences will be done away with by the ongoing evolution of technique itself, and indeed, that it is only by means of such evolution that this can happen. The inconveniences we emphasize are always dependent on technical solutions, and it is only by means of techniques that they can be solved. This fact leads to the following considerations. Every solution to some technical inconvenience is able only to reinforce the system of techniques in their ensemble. Enmeshed in a process of technical development like our own, the possibilities of human survival are better served by more technique than less, a fact which contributes nothing, however, to the resolution of the basic problem. Second, we hear too often that morals are being threatened by the growth of our techniques. For example, we hear of greater moral decadence in those environments most directly affected technically, say, in working class or urbanized environments. We hear, too, of familial disintegration as a function of techniques. The falseness of this problem consists in contrasting the technological environment with the moral values inculcated by society itself. The presumed opposition between ethical issues and technological systematics probably at the present is, and certainly in the long run will be, false. The traditional ethical environment and the traditional moral values are admittedly in process of disappearing, and we are witnessing the creation of a new technological ethics with its own values. We are witnessing the evolution of a morally consistent system of imperatives and virtues, which tends to replace the traditional system. But man is not necessarily left thereby on a morally inferior level, although a moral relativism is indeed implied, an attitude according to which everything is well, provided that the individual obeys some ethic or other. We could contest the value of this development if we had a clear and adequate concept of what good in itself is. But such judgments are impossible on the basis of our general morality. On that level, what we are getting is merely a substitution of a new technological morality for a traditional one which technique has rendered obsolete. Third, we dread the sterilization of art through technique. We hear of the artist's lack of freedom, calm, and the impossibility of meditation in the technological society. This problem is no more real than the two preceding. On the contrary, the best artistic production of the present is a result of a close connection between art and technique. Naturally, new artistic form, expression, and ethic are implied, but this fact does not make art less art than what we traditionally called such. What assuredly is not art is a fixation in congealed forms, and a rejection of technical evolution as exemplified, say, in the neoclassicism of the 19th century or in present-day socialist realism. The modern cinema furnishes an artistic response comparable to the Greek theater at its best, and modern music, painting, and poetry express an authentic aesthetic expression of mankind plunged into a new technical environment. Fourth, one last example of a false problem is our fear that the technological society is completely eliminating instinctive human values and powers. It is held that systematization, organization, rationalized conditions of labor, overly hygienic living conditions, and the like have a tendency to repress the forces of instinct. For some people the phenomenon of beatniks and hooligans is explained by youth's violent reaction and the protestation of youth's vital force to a society which is over-organized, over-ordered, over-regulated, in short, technicized. But here too, even if the facts are established beyond question, it is very likely that a superior conception of the technological society will result in the integration of these instinctive, creative, and vital forces. Compensatory mechanisms are already coming into play.
Because the only truth you know is what you get over this tube. Right now, there is an entire generation that never knew anything that didn't come out of this tube. This tube is the gospel, the ultimate revelation. This tube can make or break presidents, popes, prime ministers. This tube is the most awesome goddamn force in the whole godless world. The most awesome goddamn propaganda force in the whole godless world. So you listen to me. Listen to me. Television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. Because at the bottom of all our terrified souls, we know that democracy is a dying giant, a sick, dying, decaying political concept writhing in its final pain. What is finished is the idea that this great country is dedicated to the freedom and flourishing of every individual in it. It's the individual that's finished. It's the single, solitary human being that's finished. It's every single one of you out there. Because this is no longer a nation of independent individuals. It's a nation of some 200-odd million transistorized, deodorized, whiter than white, steel-belted bodies, totally unnecessary as human beings, and as replaceable as piston rods. Go to yourselves, because that's the only place you're ever going to find any real truth. But man, you're never going to get any truth from us. We'll tell you anything you want to hear. We lie like hell. We'll tell you that Kojak always gets the killer and that nobody ever gets cancer in Archie Bunker's house. And no matter how much trouble the hero is in, don't worry, just look at your watch. At the end of the hour, he's going to win. We'll tell you any shit you want to hear. We deal in illusions, man. None of it is true. But you people sit there day after day, night after night, all ages, colors, creeds, We're all you know. You're beginning to believe the illusions we're spinning here. You're beginning to think that the tube is reality and that your own lives are unreal. You do whatever the tube tells you. You dress like the tube. You eat like the tube. You raise your children like the tube. You even think like the tube. This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
Even less aware of the questions involved than we are. Is the arbiter we seek to be found among the philosophers, those thinking specialists? We well know the small influence these gentry exert upon our society, and how the technicians of every order distrust them and rightly refuse to take their reveries seriously. Even if the philosopher could make his voice heard, he would still have to contrive means of mass education so as to communicate an effective message to the masses. Can the technician himself assume mastery over technique? The trouble here is that the technician is always a specialist and cannot make the slightest claim to have mastered any technique but his own. Those for whom technique bears its meaning in itself will scarcely discover the values which lend meaning to what they are doing. They will not even look for them. The only thing they can do is to apply their technical specialty and assist in its refinement. They cannot in principle dominate the totality of the technical problem or envisage it in its global dimensions. Ergo, they are completely incapable of mastering it. Can the scientist do it? There, if anywhere, is the great hope. Does not the scientist dominate our techniques? Is he not an intellectual inclined and fit to put basic questions? Unfortunately, we are obliged to re-examine our hopes here when we look at things as they are. We see quickly enough that the scientist is as specialized as the technician, as incapable of general ideas, and as much out of commission as the philosopher. Think of the scientists who, on one tack or another, have addressed themselves to the technical phenomenon: Einstein, Oppenheimer, Carroll. It is only too clear that the ideas these gentlemen have advanced in the sphere of the philosophic or the spiritual are vague, superficial, and extremely contradictory. They really ought to stick to warnings and proclamations, for as soon as they essay anything else, the other scientists and the technicians rightly refuse to take them seriously, and they even run the risk of losing their reputations as scientists. Can the politician bring it off? In the democracies, the politicians are subject to the wishes of their constituents, who are primarily concerned with the happiness and well-being which they think technique assures them. Moreover, the further we get on, the more a conflict shapes up between the politicians and the technicians. But it would appear that the power of the politician is being, and will continue to be, outclassed by the power of the technician in modern states. Only dictatorships can impose their will on technical evolution. But, on the one hand, human freedom would gain nothing thereby, and, on the other, a dictatorship thirsty for power has no recourse at all but to push toward an excessive development of various techniques at its disposal. Any of us? An individual can doubtless seek the soundest attitude to dominate the techniques at his disposal. He can inquire after the values to impose on techniques and his use of them, and search out the way to follow in order to remain a man in the fullest sense of the word within a technological society. All this is extremely difficult, but it is far from being useless, since it is apparently the only solution presently possible. But the individual's efforts are powerless to resolve in any way the technical problem in its universality. To accomplish this would mean that all men adopt the same values and the same behavior. The second real problem posed by the technological society is whether or not a new civilization can appear which is inclusive of technique. The elements of this question are as difficult as those of the first. It would obviously be vain to deny all the things that can contribute something useful to a new civilization: security, ease of living, social solidarity, shortening of the work week, social security, and so forth. But a civilization in the strictest sense of the term is not brought into being by all these things. A threefold contradiction resides between civilization and technique, of which we must be aware if we are to approach the problem correctly. The first is that the technical world is the world of material things. It is put together out of material things and with respect to them. When technique displays any interest in man, it does so by converting him into a material object. The supreme and final authority in the technological society is fact, at once ground and evidence. And when we think on man as he exists in this society, it can only be as a being immersed in the universe of objects. machines, and innumerable material things. Technique indeed guarantees him such material happiness as material objects can. But the technical society is not, and cannot be, a genuinely humanist society, since it puts in first place not man but material things. It can only act on man by lessening him and putting him in the way of the quantitative. The radical contradiction referred to exists between technical perfection and human development, because such perfection is only to be achieved through quantitative development and necessarily aims exclusively at what is measurable. Human excellence, on the contrary, is of the domain of the qualitative and aims at what is not measurable. Spiritual values cannot evolve as a function of material improvement. The transition from the technically quantitative to the humanly qualitative is an impossible one. In our times, technical growth monopolizes all human forces, passions, intelligences, and virtues in such a way that it is in practice nigh impossible to seek and find anywhere any distinctively human excellence. And if this search is impossible, there cannot be any civilization in the proper sense of the term. The second contradiction is that technical growth leads to a growth of power in the sense of technical means incomparably more effective than anything ever before invented, power which has as its object only power, in the widest sense of the word. The possibility of action becomes limitless and absolute. For example, we are confronted for the first time with the possibility of the annihilation of all life on Earth, since we have the means to accomplish it. In every sphere of action we are faced with just such absolute possibilities. Again, by way of example, governmental techniques, which amalgamate organizational, psychological, and police techniques, tend to lend to government absolute powers. And here I must emphasize a great law which I believe to be essential to the comprehension of the world in which we live, that is to say, that when power becomes absolute, values disappear. When man is able to accomplish anything at all, there is no value which can be proposed to him. When the means of action are absolute, no goal of action is imaginable. Power eliminates, in proportion to its growth, the boundary between good and evil, between the just and the unjust. We are familiar enough with this phenomenon in totalitarian societies. The distinction between good and evil disappears beginning with the moment that the ground of action, for example the instinct of the proletariat, claims to have absolute power and thus to incorporate immediately all value. Thus it is that the growth of technical means tending to absolutism forbids the appearance of values, and condemns to sterility our search for the ethical and the spiritual. Again, where technique has place, there is the implication of the impossibility of the evolution of civilization. The fourth and final contradiction is that technique can never engender freedom. Of course, technique frees mankind from a whole collection of ancient constraints. It is evident, for example, that it liberates him from the limits imposed on him by time and space, that man, through its agency, is free, or at least tending to become free, from famine, excessive heat and cold, the rhythms of the seasons, and from the gloom of night, that the race is freed from certain social constraints through its commerce with the universe, and from its intellectual limitations through its accumulation of information. But is this what it means really to be free? Other constraints as oppressive and rigorous as the traditional ones are imposed on the human being in today's technological society through the agency of technique. New limits and technical oppressions have taken the place of the older, natural constraints, and we certainly cannot assure that much has been gained. The problem is deeper. The operation of technique is the contrary of freedom, an operation of determinism and necessity. Technique is an ensemble of rational and efficient practices, a collection of orders, schemes, and mechanisms. All of this expresses very well a necessary order and a determinate process, but one into which freedom, unorthodoxy, in the sphere of the gratuitous and spontaneous cannot penetrate. All that these last could possibly introduce is discord and disorder. The more technical actions increase in society, the more human autonomy and initiative diminish. The more the human being comes to exist in a world of ever-increasing demands, fortified with technical apparatus possessing its own laws to meet these demands, the more he loses any possibility of free choice and individuality in action. This loss is greatly magnified by technique's character of self-determination, which makes its appearance among us as a kind of fatality and as a species of perpetually exaggerated necessity. But where freedom is excluded in this way, an authentic civilization has little chance. Confronted in this way by the problem, it is clear to us that no solution can exist, in spite of the writings of all the authors who have concerned themselves with it. They all make an unacceptable premise. This is, the rejection of technique and return to a pre-technical society. One may well regret that some value or other of the past, some social or moral form, has disappeared, but when one attacks the problem of the technical society, one can scarcely make the serious claim to be able to revive the past, a procedure which, in any case, scarcely seems to have been, globally speaking, much of an improvement over the human situation of today. All we know with certainty is that it was different, that a human being confronted other dangers, errors, difficulties, and temptations.
Gallo-romain, chaque localité, chaque source, chaque endroit particulier avait un genius, avait un petit génie. Et les chrétiens se sont appropriés ce petit génie et en ont fait un saint. Alors, ça me paraît avoir été l'une des malhonnêtetés terribles de l'Église. De faire glisser un pseudo-christianisme au travers du maintien de croyances païennes, en définitive. Alors, l'alliance de l'Église et du pouvoir, ça a été la seconde grande trahison. Je suis convaincu que le jugement dernier qui existera ne se conclura jamais par un partage entre des bons et des méchants. Autrement dit, je ne crois pas à l'enfer, l'enfer dont il n'est d'ailleurs pas question dans la Bible, et il n'y a en définitive que des gens qui méritaient tous d'être condamnés et qui tous sont graciés. Je pense que le jugement consistera à ce que Dieu nous fasse revoir ce qu'a été notre vie. Et voir notre vie telle que Dieu l'a vue, ça me paraîtra certainement un châtiment suffisant. Et une fois qu'on aura pris conscience de cette condamnation méritée, nous recevons la grâce. Et Dieu ne fait que ça. Que dans le paganisme gallo-romain, chaque localité, chaque source, chaque endroit particulier avait un génie, avait un petit génie. Et les chrétiens se sont...
Screw it to hell with it. I went through hell with accelerants and blew up my wagon, tailspin, bucket man, just my pale skin, mad went from Hellman's and being wrapped in lavish. Screws Olympics, 97 Freaknik, how can I be down mean? Bazaar in Florida, Bruce Willis slept on the Florida motel then.
I think my phone is
Dr. Dre said, hell yeah, and I got a stamp like a postcard, word the mailman. And I know they're gonna hate, but I don't care. So I can't wait to hit him with the stare and the big square in the face.
Where we're more solid in that area so that you can burn yourself here.
I got that.
Solid there and solid there. This is all us as companies. The doppelganger shit, you see the doppelganger situation everywhere. So it's like your doppelganger becomes solid in that realm. So when you too deep, shit hits the fan. Shit hits the fan, and that's what that episode of Black Mirror is about too, with Miley Cyrus. Her doppelganger, she went to sleep, but she woke up in her fucking dreams. I'm sorry for the cursing. I feel it so passionately because this is a key. This is a key that's going to. This is important to know if you're going to literally make real shit, not false shit, because this conscious community bullshit is being used. So they know that you are extremely fucking powerful because there are NPCs roaming around that have no absolute soul in the program. They don't worry about those people, but they program those people. They're empty vessels, so any empty theater can be filled with the consciousness. You know what I'm saying? You got Mrs. Sarah Hellman walking around. She's been
subconsciously, because she's an MPC, she's a program, and then a consciousness from the astral says, oh, I need to activate this program to like get in the way to sabotage that bitch over there who's actually a person. So Sarah gets animated and she like gets angry and she like argues with the person, you know what I'm saying? So she becomes a distraction. So the NPCs, not saying this is not a good or bad conversation. This is like NPC, actual programs who are empty. Until they're given a job, a temporary job, you know what I'm saying, and do what they need to do to distract the people that they actually have roaming around this program, that are the actual batteries for this matrix. The people who have the superpowers that you're literally like, that you're electromagnetic. So you keep this fake, false 4%er program intact. So, oh my God, so that's the solution. So when the superhero or when the person who actually has a son, a soul, wakes up in the program, you shine, you light up. So they see you on a radar. That's why I keep saying cloak yourself, cloak your light. Don't shine that shit right now. We don't need to be beacons. We don't need to be beacons of light. It's time to go into the shadows. It's time to cloak your light because they're after the light. So the more you shine brightly with your light, the more they know exactly who you are, and they know that you don't know who you are. So that's the sweet spot. Oh, she's waking up. She has a bright light. Let me go and get her. Let me snatch her up and tell her how special she is. Because she's always going to be loyal to my program. Okay? So she's always going to think that this is her mission.
J'ai une expérience très importante parce que je me suis aperçu que à ce poste modeste, je ne pouvais matériellement pas étudier toutes les questions qui dépendaient de mon ressort. À la Libération, nous n'étions pas nombreux comme adjoints au maire, c'était une toute petite municipalité. Donc, il y avait beaucoup trop de questions. J'étais donc obligé de faire confiance au rapport des bureaux. Et je me suis très vite rendu compte que je ne pouvais pas faire confiance au rapport des bureaux ou des techniciens. Lorsque je donnais une question à étudier à tel groupe de techniciens, on me fournissait un rapport. Lorsque je faisais des vérifications, je m'apercevais qu'il y avait toujours des biaisages, mettons. Il est bien évident que si un adjoint au maire n'est pas capable d'étudier les 20 dossiers qu'il a journellement sur les bras, comment un ministre pourrait-il le faire personnellement et sérieusement, qui ne peut le faire que par l'intermédiaire des bureaux, que par l'intermédiaire des techniciens, etc. Alors, on lui résume en 3 lignes, on lui dit, bon, ben ça c'est ceci, et puis c'est fini. Et il juge en fonction de ça, et il signe en fonction de ça. Mais quand je me suis aperçu que chaque soir on me présentait 20 lettres que j'avais à signer, sur lesquelles je savais pertinemment de quoi il s'agissait pour 4 ou 5 de ces affaires, j'ai renoncé à la vie politique. C'était pas possible. Je crois que l'homme politique est un homme extrêmement démuni. Il dépend tellement de tout ce qui est avant et de tout ce qui est après. C'est-à-dire que tout ce qui est avant, les rapports, les études techniques, etc., il va prendre sa décision en fonction de ça. Et sa décision, elle sera ensuite appliquée par des administrations. Comment ? C'est aussi un problème qui n'est pas du tout clair. Alors, l'homme politique m'apparaît comme réellement au fond, le paravent. L'administration joue en fonction de son autosubsistance et son autojustification. Alors, je crois que c'est l'obstacle principal, en effet, que peut rencontrer un pouvoir. Nous sommes là devant un ensemble qui maintenant a pris une envergure d'autant plus, je dirais, à la fois grande et surtout prestigieuse depuis que l'administration est garnie de gens éminents qui sont sortis de l'ENA, etc., et qui ont leurs raisons pour accepter ou ne pas accepter telle ou telle décision politique. Ça, on est très très loin du modèle classique que l'on envisage. L'homme politique décide, l'administrateur applique la décision, ça c'était très bien. Mais c'est tout à fait fini. J'ai une expérience très importante parce que je me suis aperçu que à ce poste modeste, je ne pouvais matériellement pas étudier toutes les questions qui dépendaient de mon ressort. À la Libération, nous n'étions pas nombreux.
And what they say is this. First of all, surveying the horrific destruction that is being inflicted on the Amazon by modern industrial society. And secondly, looking at the state of rampant chaos in the world at large. What the shamans say is that the whole crisis of the world today comes about because Western technological civilization has severed its connection to spirit. That unless we reconnect to spirit, we are going to pass through a very difficult and catastrophic time. But if we can reconnect to spirit, then the possibility remains that we can pass through this difficult time into a golden age, into a rebirth of humanity with all our potentials returned to us. Not the poor, fragmented creature we are today, told by the powerful corporations and by our governments that all that matters is the material world, brainwashed with hours of reality TV and advertisements telling us to go and buy this or that material good. Told that the only appropriate leisure activity is to go out and get absolutely drunk on alcohol, so that becomes a kind of relief from the horror of everyday life in industrial society. That somehow we can reunite the fragmented parts of our human nature, bring back in our connection to spirit, to other realms, to other dimensions, and move forward again in a positive direction.
Le rôle social ou sociopolitique dans la société était justement de constituer en face d'un pouvoir de l'État, d'un pouvoir à caractère politique, de constituer une instance capable de dire non. Et une instance capable de protéger ou d'affirmer une autre justice, par exemple, que celle de l'État. Mais il faut toujours le tenter parce qu'il faut toujours remettre en question ce qui existe. Anarchiste, c'est précisément celui qui conteste l'autorité qui dirige une société, le pouvoir de la société, c'est littéralement anarché, donc refusant le commandement. C'est quelque chose qui pour moi est tout à fait fondamental. Je peux dire que toute ma pensée est une pensée anarchiste, mais je refuse évidemment de faire partie d'une fédération anarchiste parce que ça me paraît contradictoire dans les termes. Un anarchiste, c'est forcément un individu. Ce n'est pas un groupement et encore moins un groupement qui est conforme à une certaine doctrine. Ce qui est positif dans la Révolution, c'est la destruction d'un certain ordre établi dans notre société, le pouvoir de l'État étant beaucoup moins important qu'on ne le pense. La Révolution devrait viser la puissance de la technique, par exemple, et réduire cette universalité technique. Ça serait un acte de type révolutionnaire. Le rôle social dans la société était justement de constituer en face d'un pouvoir de l'État, d'un pouvoir à caractère politique, de constituer une instance capable de dire non.
sources under the ground through a network of mycelia. So the big tree that's getting sun is passing its nutrients to the little one. Then when the leaves fall off the big one, the little one's an evergreen, and it sends nutrients back to the big one, and the mushrooms are taking a service fee for the transaction.
I'll send you some nutrients, but when the leaves fall, would you be so kind as to send some...
Of course I will, big guy! Hey, fuck you! Like, it's how beautiful. Like, you know, yes, we narrativize nature, biology, in order to fit in with a pre-existing economic ideology.
Right.
Here's a little one that, in our country... We had these things, the red squirrels. Oh, we loved the red squirrels. Lovely little things they were, bushy tails red. And then, like, the American squirrel came over here on boats and killed the red squirrel. Now there are no red squirrels.
Sorry.
Later, though, we discovered that actually what happened is that there'd been, like, loads of disruption of the red squirrels' environments, like, through development. And it was just a sort of a contributory, secondary, ancillary factor that there had been this other competing group of squirrels, i.e. an immigrant narrative was utilised because it sort of is quite, it's resonant like that. And the fact that you would be taught, you know, like sort of biology in that way, or horticulture, or whatever particular discipline that would be, like with those kind of biases, shows you how entrenched these ideas are.
Right, but that's, in some ways, that's why I'm trying to offer a different approach to cure. In other words, that it's really easy to jump into this almost allopathic model of society. Like, oh, what's the disease? The disease is capitalism. The disease is Trump. The disease is right wing. The disease is, or the disease is computers and digital. So let's just go off digital because, oh, they're so bad and they're hurt. It's like, well, wait a minute. What about looking at the vitality of the patient instead? So rather than coming up with a new algorithm to filter dangerous weaponized memes from my teen's Instagram account, what if I just make my teen and our culture more resilient to this? What if we, so I'm trying to kind of promote our humanity so we're less vulnerable to the insanity, rather than looking at the insanity as the problem to be fixed.
Yeah, you might be right about that. So how then do we promote the vitality of the patient?
Well, first, by building up, it starts to sound sad, but by building up our tolerance for being with each other. I get every year, I've only been teaching now like 5 years, and this is the 5th year, and every year, every semester, I get more notes on the first day of class from kids whose psychotherapists have given them a note saying, please excuse Johnny from class presentations, because he's got too much anxiety to stand.
How old are they?
College age.
What's that, 18?
Yeah, 18 to 22. And I think, wow. What they needed was a public school system that didn't look at itself as increasing little workers' utility value. There's all these principals and heads of universities that are meeting with CEOs to find out, what do you want your workers to know? Do you want them to know Excel? Do you want them to know Python or Java? And then they go into the classroom and teach the things that the companies want, which is the opposite purpose of public education, right? Public education was for the co-worker to have some dignity, so that he could go home at night after working all day and be able to appreciate a novel or participate in democracy. And now it's an externalized cost of companies. So we throw, iPads and God knows what in the classroom. I think, we've got to reacquaint ourselves with one another. Take, if you can, 10, 15 minutes a week and sit with another person, learn to make eye contact again. Don't expect to have your mirror neurons fire or your oxytocin released by staring at someone on a FaceTime or Skype video. That there's, being in a room, making contact with a person it leverages 500,000 years of evolution that does increase your vitality. So that's why, that was the whole team, the whole team idea is to help people understand that being human is a team sport, and that being social is when you get healthy. That's what it is. And these imitation forms of social life are basically like porn is to sex. It's really not the same thing, and it's not enhancing it's not building solidarity. It's not giving us the power we need to combat what we have to fight.
It compounds the conditions that make us easily manipulated into little solitary units of energy. Also, my own fear growing up and sort of feelings of inadequacy meant that I would kind of welcome isolated environments. I'm pretty scared of people sometimes and being in groups, but I recognise how necessary it is. The thing I've been thinking a lot, Douglas, is that to a point, and again, this is not to fetishize nostalgia or a kind of like a harking back, but where possible, if we recreate indigenous conditions, simply like if we don't eat synthesized food and we eat food that's like available at the right time of year in the right quantities, that's been naturally produced, permaculture, etc., then that's healthy for us. And if we have relationships with about 100 people and we spend some time involved in community-based tasks as opposed to always individualistic tasks, we're somehow replicating the conditions for which we were designed, evolved. And increasingly we don't. Increasingly we have become ourselves industrialized, agriculturalized. We've become little units of energy to be farmed out. We don't have much. Where do we engage now with our individual human agency, our ability to be spontaneous, our ability to be in an eternal present? What institutions exist that encourage it? What is our route back to that? What could possibly ever challenge this sort of fast-moving juggernaut that we're all being sort of crushed by if we're not riding it?
It's funny, I'd never thought about it in terms of institutions. I mean, in some ways, our religious institutions do that. If you stand in a church or synagogue and you're singing with other people, for me, my yoga class is one of those places, where I'm actually in a room with these same dozen people, a bunch of times a week, and it starts to feel like we're part of a little networked organism. I mean, in a certain way, it's easier than a lot of people. Even now, they'll come to me and say, "Oh, where can we go do Team Human? We should start Team Human meetups and Team Human clubs and Team Human this." And I'm like, "Well, it's already, the people are here." It's like that. I'm not asking for people to join my Team Human. It's just, like the human race. Join.
Get rid of those other bloody humans. Yeah. I hate them.
But you can do it. I mean, in the streets of New York, I started to play this game now where when I'm walking in the city and everybody's staring in their phones, I try to find someone else who's not, and then make that almost like it's part of a conspiracy, like the secret eye contact. Like, oh, there's another one. You're awake too. Oh my God, look at them. Look at them. It's just like, I remember because when I was a little kind of hippie rave kid, you'd see someone on the street who'd been at the rave the night before, and it's like, oh, I saw you. So it's a little bit of that, but I mean, I think it's as simple as that. It's taking the places where we already congregate and using them, or getting off the machine and feeling okay about not accomplishing anything other than sacred contact with other people. So. There's also, there's so many ways to try to change the world without starting a whole new thing. Also, there's still school boards and town boards and land use meetings and those town meetings that only crazy people go to. Well, we can go to them too.
Yeah, I see it now. Democracy. Pure democracy is time consuming. I'm involved in a few things that require democracy, and it's counterintuitive. It's not like my nature is, even though my ideology is we're all the same, we should find fully autonomous communities and collectives where people are as close to the powers that govern their lives as possible. People should be in charge of their places of work. People should be in charge of their communities. People shouldn't be tyrannized by abstract economic ideas that prohibit them from being human in the purest ways. But if you put me in a room full of people, I find subtle ways to dominate them and take all of the attention.
Well, right. But at least hopefully, that you're playing a game, that this is our game that we're playing above an essentially loving, connected, reality that we're in. The other problem with when we describe, this return to ground, to actual local living is when the Wall Street Journal or someone reviews a book of mine that's arguing for that, they'll say, "Oh, look, he wants to go back in time. He wants to take us back to the Middle Ages, and it was worse then." It's like, no, there's a difference between kind of going back and retrieval. What I'm asking is that we bring forward the technologies, the sciences, the wisdoms that we've left behind.
Yes, and that's most disingenuous criticism, because actually their ideology, as you have explained, and I'm going to take you at your word, was created and cultivated precisely then, and has just been perpetuating itself in modernity, artificially held up necessarily in recent history through, what was that thing where they have to inject it sounds like artificial insemination, but it's with money.
Oh,
quantitative easing.
Yeah, right, which is basically reactionary, not disruptive or productive or future-oriented at all. They're trying to keep in place the operating system that the lords of feudalism imported in order to prevent free market economics from destroying them. And the people that they quote, if they just don't read them, read Marx, read Adam Smith. Adam Smith's whole thing was, don't let big corporations destroy the economy. We've got to keep it small. We've got to keep it local. So and you see the Economist talking about him as if he's arguing for libertarianism.
But now we we've skipped over it a little bit, but we feel like the nation state is possibly not the answer, or that it's a construct. What possible institution or entity could be big enough to challenge corporate interests on that scale? How could regulation be leveraged?
I mean, the biggest opponent we can structure would be humanity itself. If people can get out of the survivalist, consumerist mindset. Right now, most of us, and even the billionaires, they're trying to earn enough money so they can insulate themselves from the world.
Yeah, that's my plan.
You can't. And with the billionaires, they're trying to earn enough money to insulate themselves from the problems that they're creating by earning money in that way.
Yeah.
And they're never gonna do it. That's why they're asking me, where to put their bomb shelters or their fallout shelters, or how to maintain control of their security force after the event. That
Now, we've realised that the security force will not be as incentivised when the economy collapses and money's meaningless, and they might realise that it was us that caused this and turn on us.
So what do we do? Right, what do we do? It's like, dude, you
New Zealand.
We get there. So they're in zombie. They're in zombie apocalypse mode right now. And that's why they're in such an unhappy place. But I think everybody's in zombie apocalypse mode. Everybody's looking down at that really dark future. So it's a whole energetic shift, really, in the way people approach their lives. It's just hard. It's hard to stay alive right now. It's hard to make a living, to pay your rent.
One of the things I feel encouraged by is that all of these systems at some point have passed through and been born of the human consciousness, or whatever precedes human consciousness, or every idea has been transmitted through human beings. I know meteorology, so. There is an access point to change, and it's the consciousness of individuals. You talk about, there's two things I'd like to sort of lump together, like your interest in psychedelics, DMT, etc., and your notion of awe and the significance of awe. And I wonder if this is some pivotal point in human consciousness that could be a fertile place for transformation.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, for me, has to do with understanding what makes human beings different from machines. Because in my digital communities, there's a lot of people who think that humans are about to be obsolete, and we should just upload consciousness to a chip, or accept that robots are our successor and pass the evolutionary torch to the machines. So I started thinking about, what makes humans different? And one of the things that's special about humans is that we can experience awe, that we can just be blown away by something, and how different that is from this sort of uncanny valley feeling of almost vertigo that we can have in a digital experience, or trying to watch like a Toy Story kind of a movie. Sometimes when the characters are just a little too close to being human, you get that uncanny valley, kind of experience. That's the way most people get their awe now, is by slapping on some VR goggle, not the awe of what is that? And even in the book I talked about the moment that a dog, when you do something it doesn't understand, and it kind of that's we love that because we see ourselves in that. It's that that it's a little mind is being blown. It's a little, that sense of changing context. All of a sudden, you don't know what reality tunnel am I in, and which am I going to use? I mean, and that's the sort of the beauty of at least the psychedelic experience. And I don't know, psychedelic experience is artificial in a certain sense, in that you're taking something to get there. But it's also the experience when, the birth of a child or seeing a vista. You get filled with something, and then, as we know now, your awe, in the experience of awe, increases your immune response, and it's so much. You get so much strength. You experience more empathy after. If you have awe, and then you see someone in pain or someone in another situation, you end up with more empathy for them. So awe, to me, seems to be an essential human opening experience. But the day-to-day life that we've created for ourselves is almost anathema to awe.
Yes. Curiously and ironically, the word awesome has become profligate and abundant at the time that awe itself has been extracted from our human experience. I think of some ideas I heard in situationism and Reitner of De Boer, the idea of the spectacle, that we participate in reality as consumers or as workers, but we are not invited to participate in reality in a spontaneous way as authors of our own reality. I think that this idea of awe, whether it's induced through nature or through art or through religion or through psychedelics, is the sort of sudden awareness that reality, as I previously understood it, was limited, and it hints at realms that I am not usually able to access because of the limitations of my individuated consciousness. And to sort of taste that, to hold that, and in my experience, I can only hold it for a moment, recontextualizes my previous reality and indeed the systems that we allow to govern us.
Right, and it also awakens you to the idea that these institutions are not creating your reality for you. They're convincing you to create the reality that they want you to create, but we are still actively creating our reality. It's like when I've had friends who've been in cults, and I'll try to get them out of a cult, and I've gotten a few out, and a couple I haven't.
Are your friends all joining cults?
Not all, but there was a time.
Seems
when I was,
like too many, Douglas.
Yeah, well, in the 1980s, my friends were actors.
Fuck this, I'm going to join a cult.
Well, and they had the Nam-myoho Renge Kyo thing that they would put the, to get the new, to get a job, you would chant for it. But with most of them, they would think that the cult leader had some power over them. And the way I would try to help them get out is like, no, this guy's not special in any way. It's you. I mean, once you take responsibility for, I did this, I did that, I did this, I fell for this, that guy wasn't nice, but I still fell for it. Then you can get yourself out of it. And I feel that's sort of the trick with capitalism too. Although there's still all of these structures, at least if we wake up to this, the rat race that we've bought into, then we can start to say, well, what can I start to do differently? And then you realize, well, there's nothing I can do, but if I turn to the others, maybe there's something we can do. And that's why we got to do it. Solidarity is the prerequisite to any kind of revolution or renaissance.
Yeah, as individuals, our power is it's
nil.
It's nil. I like that motif, find the others. Can you tell me the story which is in your book?
Yeah, well, it's funny because Find the Others, it was another Timothy Leary story. It was
cool.
In 1968, he did a series of lectures at Berkeley. And this young woman got up after the lecture and she said, asked him a question. She said, I've had the psychedelic experience. I've seen how everything's connected. What do I do now? And he said, find the others. And it was beautiful in the sense he meant find the other people who've had that experience and start to, gather and share and talk about it. And I mean it that way, but then I also really mean find the others. Look for the humanity in the eyes of the person wearing the MAGA hat, or the there's an angry Brexiter that you don't like. Find the human there, because they're human too. Someone was saying, how can I, like the person who hates the Mexican immigrants? How can I like the person who's, wants to build a wall? So, well, if you can't see the humanity in the person who wants to build the wall, how do you expect them to see the humanity in the supposed Mexican on the other side of the wall?
All we're discussing at that point is aesthetics. Like, I don't like their intolerance, my intolerance. Like it's sort of a kind of Christian idea, but I think, or at least that's one of the ways it was popularised. Yeah. But like this obligation to love, this obligation to understand. I've been thinking about this, Douglas. I've been thinking like morality and ethics are something for yourself, not something to pillory other people with. If if you want to be vegan, if you whatever it is you want to be, but like this kind of like this personal expansionism, this outrage, this condemnation.
Exactly, social justice on capitalist steroids. It's like, what's its end point? It feels like it's in its end point. Like it's what we want to do is this. We want to complain and condemn others. There's no vision for this is what we would like to create. These are the kind of cultures that we see succeeding. When you talk about the sort of anarcho-syndicalism, and it was roughly what I thought it would be, thank God, because I've been telling people I am one and telling people they should be one also. So it's good to know that it's not the Nazis, for example. Oh, it's like the Nazis with them? Oh God, oh no, that was terrible. I feel that there is so much variation within humanity. Of course, we have the important things are in common, the same as we would recognise biologically from our organs and our hormones. We are basically the same, but there is so much variation socially and culturally. It seems ridiculous to ask people to live in, if not arbitrary, then not truthfully integrated communities of 60 million people called England or 300 million people called America. It seems like that, unless that idea is serving you, the idea of England, and I love it. I love the England football team. I love the flag. I love the pageantry and history. I love so much of that. I love America. I love blue jeans, McDonald's, Jimi Hendrix. So much I love. But if it's not helping people now, why would we continue to believe in these systems that are only tools for our oppression? Instead, we should create smaller communities where we have personal authority and govern our own. Right, but you can't take it away from people all at once.
No.
So what I'm thinking is you sort of go, England. Right, we're in England. All right, and now we're in America. Okay, I'm a white guy. And so all of these divisions are they're concepts, but they're not real. I mean, and we can go back and, and I tried to do that. I thought, okay, I'm going to denaturalize the corporation, denaturalize central currency, denaturalize the nation state.
What does that mean?
By show that they're not conditions of nature. They're construct. They're invented, and that, okay, here were these cities and here was this moment that this lord said, oh no, now there's this barrier. But we...
Our duty is to occupy ourselves with the dangers, errors, difficulties, and temptations of modern man in the modern world. All regret for the past is vain, every desire to revert to a former social stage is unreal. There is no possibility of turning back, of annulling, or even of arresting technical progress. What is done is done. It is our duty to find our place in our present situation, and in no other. Nostalgia has no survival value in the modern world and can only be considered a flight into dreamland. We shall insist no further on this point. Beyond it, we can divide into two great categories: the authors who search for a solution to the problem posed by technique. The first class is that of those who hold that the problem will solve itself. The second, of those who hold that the problem demands a great effort or even a great modification of the whole man. We shall indicate a number of examples drawn from each class. Politicians, scientists and technicians are to be found in the first class. In general, they consider the problem in a very concrete and practical way. Their general notion seems to be that technical progress resolves all difficulties with their appearance, and that it contains within itself a solution to everything. The sufficient condition for them, therefore, is that technical progress be not arrested. Everything which plagues us today will disappear tomorrow. The primary example of these people is furnished by the Marxists, for whom technical progress is the solution to the plight of the proletariat and all its miseries, and to the problem posed by the exploitation of man by man in the capitalistic world. Technical progress, which is for Marx the motive force of history, necessarily increases the forces of production, and simultaneously produces a progressive conflict between forward-moving factors and stationary social factors like the state, law, ideology, and morality, a conflict occasioning the periodic disappearance of the outmoded factors. Specifically, in the world of the present, conflict necessitates the disappearance of the structures of capitalism, which are so constituted as to be completely unable to absorb the economic results of technical progress, and are hence obliged to vanish. When they do vanish, they of necessity make room for a socialist structure of society corresponding perfectly to the sound and normal utilization of technique. The Marxist solution to the technical problems is therefore an automatic one, since the transition to socialism is in itself the solution. Everything is for them resolved in the socialist society, and humankind finds therein its maturation. Technique, integrated into the socialist society, changes sign. From being destructive it becomes constructive. From being a means of human exploitation it becomes humane. The contradiction between the infrastructures and the suprastructures disappears. In other words, all the admittedly difficult problems raised in the modern world belong to the structure of capitalism and not to that of technique. On the one hand, it suffices that social structures become socialist for social problems to disappear, and on the other, society must necessarily become socialist by the very movement of technique. Technique, therefore, carries in itself the response to all the difficulties it raises. A second example of this kind of solution is given by a certain number of technicians, for example, Frisch. All difficulties, according to Frisch, will inevitably be resolved by the technical growth which will bring the technicians to power. Technique admittedly raises certain conflicts and problems, but their cause is that the human race remains attached to certain political ideologies and moralities and loyal to certain outmoded and antiquated humanists whose sole visible function is to provoke discord of heart and head, thereby preventing men from adapting themselves and from entering resolutely into the path of technical progress. Ergo, men are subject to distortions of life and consciousness which have their origin, not in technique, but in the conflict between technique and the false values to which men remain attached. These fake values, decrepit sentiments, and outmoded notions must inevitably be eliminated by the invincible progress of technique. In particular, in the political domain, the majority of crises arise from the fact that men are still wedded to certain antique political forms and ideas, for example, democracy. All problems will be resolved if power is delivered into the hand of the technicians who alone are capable of directing technique in its entirety and making of it a positive instrument for human service. This is all the more true in that, thanks to the so-called human techniques, for example, propaganda, they will be in a position to take account of the human factor in the technical context. The technocrats will be able to use the totality of technique without destroying the human being, but rather by treating him as he should be treated so as to become simultaneously useful and happy. General power accorded to the technicians become technocrats is the only way out, since they are the only ones possessing the necessary competence, and, in any case, they are being carried to power by the current of history, the fact which alone offers a quick enough solution to technical problems. It is impossible to rely on the general improvement of the human species, a process which would take too long and would be too chancy. For the generality of men, it is necessary to take into account that technique establishes an inevitable discipline, which, on the one hand, they must accept, and, on the other, the technocrats will humanize. The third and last example is furnished by the economists, who, in very different ways, affirm the thesis of the automatic solution. Forasti is a good example of such economists. For him, the first thing to do is to draw up a balance between that which technique is able to deliver and that which it may destroy. In his eyes there is no real problem. What technique can bring to man is incomparably superior to that which it threatens. Moreover, if difficulties do exist, they are only temporary ones which will be resolved beneficially, as was the case with the similar difficulties of the last century. Nothing decisive is at stake. Man is in no mortal danger. The contrary is the case. Technique produces the foundation, infrastructure, and suprastructure which will enable man really to become man. What we have known up to now can only be called the prehistory of a human race so overwhelmed by material cares, famine, and danger, that the truly human never had an opportunity to develop into a civilization worthy of the name. Human intellectual, spiritual, and moral life will, according to Forasti, never mature except when life is able to start from a complete satisfaction of its material needs, complete security, including security from famine and disease. The growth of technique, therefore, initiates the genuinely human history of the whole man. This new type of human being will clearly be different from what we have hitherto known, but this fact should occasion no complaint or fear. The new type cannot help being superior to the old in every way, after all the traditional, and exclusively material, obstacles to his development.
So, there is an access point to change, and it's the consciousness of individuals. You talk about, there's two things I'd like to sort of lump together, like your interest in psychedelics, DMT, etc., and your notion of awe and the significance of awe. And I wonder if this is some pivotal point in human consciousness that could be a sort of fertile place for transformation.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, for me, has to do with understanding what makes human beings. What is that? And even in the book, I talked about the moment that a dog, when you do something it doesn't understand, and it kind of... we love that because we see ourselves in that. It's that, that its little mind is being blown. It's that sense of changing context. All of a sudden, you don't know what reality tunnel am I in, and which am I going to use. I mean, that's the sort of the beauty of at least the psychedelic experience. And I don't know, psychedelic experience is artificial in a certain sense, in that you're taking something to get there, but it's also the experience when the birth of a child or seeing a vista. You get filled with something, and then, as we know now, your awe, in the experience of awe, increases your immune response, and it's so much. You get so much strength. You experience more empathy after. If you have awe, and then you see someone in pain or someone in another situation, you end up with more empathy for them. So awe, to me, seems to be an essential human opening experience. But the day-to-day life that we've created for ourselves is almost anathema to awe.
Yes. Curiously and ironically, the word awesome has become profligate and abundant at the time that awe itself has been extracted from our human experience. I think of some ideas I heard in situationism and right now of Debord, the idea of the spectacle, that we participate in reality as consumers or as workers, but we are not invited to participate in reality in a spontaneous way as authors of our own reality.
Thus, progress occurs automatically, and the inevitable role of technique will be that of guaranteeing such material development as allows the intellectual and spiritual maturation of what has been up to now only potentially present in human nature. The orientation of the other group of doctrines affirms, on the contrary, that man is dangerously imperiled by technical progress, and that human will, personality, and organization must be set again to rights if society is to be able to guard against the imminent danger. Unfortunately, these doctrines share with their opposites the quality of being too optimistic, in that they affirm that their thesis is even feasible and that man is really capable of the rectifications proposed. I will give 3 very different examples of this, noting that the attitude in question is generally due to philosophers and theologians. The orientation of Einstein, and the closely related one of Jules Romains, are well known. That is to say, that the human being must get technical progress back again into his own hands, admitting that the situation is so complicated and the data so overwhelming that only some kind of superstate can possibly accomplish the task. A sort of spiritual power integrated into a world government in possession of indisputable moral authority might be able to master the progression of techniques and to direct human evolution. Einstein's suggestion is the convocation of certain philosopher-scientists, whereas Romain's idea is the establishment of a supreme court of humanity. Both of these bodies would be organs of meditation, of moral quest, before which temporal powers would be forced to bow. A second example of this kind of orientation is given by Bergson, at the end of his work, The Two Sources of Morality and Religion. According to Bergson, initiative can only proceed from humanity, since in technique there is no intrinsic will. Technique has conferred disproportionate power on the human being, and a disproportionate extension to his organism. But, in this disproportionately magnified body, the soul remains what it was, for example, too small to fill it and too feeble to direct it. Hence the void between the two. Bergson goes on to say that this enlarged body awaits a supplement of soul, the mechanical demands the mystical, and that technique will never render service proportionate to its powers unless humanity, which has bent it earthwards, succeeds by its means in reforming itself and looking heavenwards. This means that humanity has a task to perform, and that man must grow proportionately to his techniques, but that he must will it and force himself to make the experiment. This experiment is, in Bergson's view, a possibility, and is even favored by the technical growth which allows more material resources to men than ever before. The required supplement of soul is therefore of the order of the possible and will suffice for humans to establish mastery over technique. The same position, it may be added, has in great part been picked up by E. Mounier. A third example is afforded by a whole group of theologians, most of them Roman Catholic. Man, in his actions in the domain of the technical, is but obeying the vocation assigned him by his Creator. Man, in continuing his work of technical creation, is pursuing the work of his Creator. Thanks to technique, this man, who was originally created insufficient, is becoming adolescent. He is summoned to new responsibilities in this world which do not transcend his powers since they correspond exactly to what God expects of him. Moreover, it is God himself who through man is the creator of technique, which is something not to be taken in itself but in its relation to its creator. Under such conditions, it is clear that technique is neither evil nor fraught with evil consequences. On the contrary, it is good and cannot be dangerous to men. It can only become evil to the extent that man turns from God. It is a danger only if its true nature is misapprehended. All the errors and problems visible in today's world result uniquely from the fact that man no longer recognizes his vocation as God's collaborator. If man ceases to adore the creature, that is to say, technique, in order to adore the true God, if he turns technique to God and to his service, the problems must disappear. All of this is considered the more true in that the world transformed by technical activity must become the point of departure and the material support of the new creation which is to come at the end of time. Finally, it is necessary to represent by itself a doctrine which holds at the present a place of some importance in the Western world, for instance, that of Father Teilhard de Chardin, a man who is simultaneously a theologian and a scientist. His doctrine appears as an intermediate between the two tendencies already sketched. For Chardin, evolution in general, since the origin of the universe, has represented a constant progression. First of all, there was a motion toward a diversification of matter and of beings. Then, there supervened a motion towards a higher unity. In the biological world, every step forward has been effected when man has passed from a stage of dispersion to a stage of concentration. At the present, technical human progress and the spontaneous movement of life are in agreement and in mutual continuity. They are evolving together toward a higher degree of organization, and this movement manifests the influence of spirit. Matter, left to itself, is characterized by a necessary and continuous degradation. But on the contrary, we note that progress, advancement, improvement do exist, and, hence, a power contradicting the spontaneous movement of matter, a power of creation and progress exists which is the opposite of matter. For example, it is spirit. Spirit has contrived technique as a means of organizing dispersed matter, in order simultaneously to express progress and to combat the degradation of matter. Technique is producing at the same time a prodigious demographic explosion, a greater density of human population. By all these means it is bringing forth communion among men, and likewise creating from inanimate matter a higher and more organized form of matter which is taking part in the ascension of the cosmos toward God. Granting that it is true that every progression in the physical and biological order is brought about by a condensation of the elements of the preceding period, what we are witnessing today, according to Chardin, is a condensation, a concentration of the whole human species. Technique, in producing this, possesses a function of unification inside humanity, so that humanity becomes able thereby to have access to a sort of unity. Technical progress is therefore synonymous with socialization, this latter being but the political and economic sign of communion among men, the temporary expression of the condensation of the human species into a whole. Technique is the irreversible agent of this condensation. It prepares the new step forward which humanity must make. When men cease to be individual and separate units, and altogether form a total and indissoluble communion, then humanity will be a single body. This material concentration is always accompanied by a spiritual maturation of the spirit, the commencement of a new species of life. Thanks to technique, there is socialization, the progressive concentration on a planetary scale of disseminated spiritual personalities into a suprapersonal unity. This mutation leads to another man, spiritual and unique, and means that humanity in its ensemble and in its unity has attained the supreme goal, i.e., its fusion with that glorious Christ who must appear at the end of time. Thus Childish holds that in technical progress man is Christified, and that technical evolution tends inevitably to the edification of the cosmic Christ. It is clear that in Chiltish's grandiose perspective, the individual problems, difficulties, and mishaps of technique are negligible. It is likewise clear how Chiltish's doctrine lies midway between the two preceding ones. On the one hand, it affirms a natural and involuntary ascension of man, a process inclusive of biology, history, and the like, evolving as a kind of will of God in which technique has its proper place, and, on the other, it affirms that the evolution in question implies consciousness, and an intense involvement on the part of man who is proceeding to socialization and thus committing himself to this mutation. These different theories repose on a too superficial view of the technical phenomenon, and they are practically inapplicable because they presuppose a certain number of necessary conditions which are not given. None of these theories, therefore, can be deemed satisfactory. It does not seem that at the present we are in a position to give a satisfactory reply to the complex of technical problems. All that appears possible is to inquire into the above-mentioned necessary conditions for a possible solution. In any case, it seems that we can set forth the following thesis. The further technical progress advances, the more the social problem of mastering this progress becomes one of an ethical and spiritual kind. In proportion to the degree that man extricates himself from the domain of the material, dominates it, and multiplies thereby the means of exploiting matter, the problem ceases to be one of human possibilities and limits and becomes one rather of knowing which man, or group of men, will exploit technical means, and what will be the enabling moral and spiritual qualities. It is essential not to consider the problem resolved once this has been said. The current attitude is false according to which, once a matter has been pronounced a matter of morality, it is something simple and also automatically resolvable. On the contrary, the more a decision depends on a man or a group of them, the more difficult it appears, if we take a realistic view of the matter and refuse to admit a priori that man is good, democratic, liberal, reasonable, and so on. The difficulty resides first in that it is impossible to trust the spontaneous employment which men will make of the available technical means. Second, a man, as we have already indicated, is integrated into the technological process. And third, if we desire to preserve man's freedom, dignity, and responsibility, it is precluded to act upon him by technical means, like psychology, and so forth. To transform a man into a reasonable being and a good exploiter of techniques through certain psychological procedures is precisely to destroy him as a spiritual and ethical subject. We are thus caught in a dilemma before the decisive question, the question which may well be the penultimate one. With this preliminary, what are these necessary conditions? First, the first thing needed is a correct diagnosis and an effort to achieve a genuine consciousness of the problem. It is necessary to see the situation clearly and to pose the problem correctly if it be desired to know just what is to be done and if adequate answers are to be forthcoming. Inexact formulation of the problem affords no hope of getting a solution. The diagnostic element, on which I do not insist, must be accompanied by becoming conscious, by passing from the intellectual to the existential, which means that mankind must accept the fact that his existence is engaged and involved in this venture, and that his very freedom is at stake.
I'm sure you're aware of the fact that there are approximately 15% of all homes in which there is only one wage earner. So that when you talk about women being able to take care of things for their married mate wage earner, the fact is that in the overwhelming majority of American homes, the women also work. And therefore, I don't think your explanation that women have other responsibilities and that's why
Work can mean part-time work or full-time work. Women do not work full-time to the same extent that men. Part-time workers make less than full-time workers.
May I ask a question about unemployment? The latest figures I saw indicated that of black youth, something like 46% of those who wanted jobs were unable to get jobs. I really would like this time to ask both of you to respond to what would you do in that situation. If you would assume for a moment that these are people who do want jobs and are unable to find work.
I would, first of all, repeal the minimum wage laws, because if you go back to, say, 1950, 1948, 49, 50, you find that at that time, the unemployment rate among black teenagers was a fraction of what it is today. And there certainly wasn't any less racism then than there is today. What was different was that at that time, the minimum wage law was a decade old. It was a decade of inflation, and the law hadn't been changed. So for all practical purposes, it didn't exist.
But don't you think that was also a decade of expansion in which there were a lot of jobs, whereas today our economy is in a recession and there are not that many jobs
If you look
available.
at the most prosperous years of the 60s and 70s, you don't find black teenage unemployment as low as it was in the recession year of 1949.
Well, I don't know what the job situation was then, but it's only recently that we have
I do.
reached
I was
the
a
point.
black teenager in 1949.
Did you get a
job? It was a recession
job?
year, and after a considerable looking, I found a job. But the point is, the kid who was living where I lived then, who's living there now, he has a hell of a lot harder time finding that job because there are so many good people who have tried to do good for him and priced him right out of the market.
Well, facing the situation as it presently exists, what would you do for that 46%?
If the situation is going to remain as it presently exists, the results will remain
No,
as
I'm
it presently
saying
exists.
now, today, what would you do to help
I would
this 46%?
repeal those things, which
but
is
that isn't going to
demonstrably-
help these 46%, is it?
Nothing.
Something has
Do you
to be
want?
done about
Do you want to change it, or do you want to leave it the same? If you want to leave it the same, everything will continue the same. If you want to change it, it'll change.
No, I think that your suggestions of change contemplate that in the future the situation will be different. But I'm asking you about the 46% of black youths who are now unemployed, who probably would not be affected by changing the law this year.
You can say that all you want, but the evidence is totally against you.
Special in any way. It's you. I mean, once you take responsibility for I did this, I did that, I did this, I fell for this, that guy wasn't nice, but I still fell for it, then you can get yourself out of it. And I feel that's sort of the trick with capitalism too. Although there's still all of these structures, at least if we wake up to this, the rat race that we've bought into, then we can start to say, well, what can I start to do differently? And then you realize, well, there's nothing I can do, but if I turn to the others, maybe there's something we can do. And that's why we've got to do it. Solidarity is the prerequisite to any kind of revolution or renaissance.
Yeah, as individuals, our power is it's
nil.
It's nil. I like that motif. Find the others. Can you tell me the story which is in your book?
Yeah, well, it's funny because Find the Others. It was another Timothy Leary story. It was
cool.
In the 1968. He did a series of lectures at Berkeley. And this young woman got up after the lecture and she said, asked him a question. She said, I've had the psychedelic experience. I've seen how everything's connected. What do I do now? And he said, find the others.
It is necessary to become conscious of the fact that in every domain, technique has established stricter and stricter domination over the human being. But this consciousness must not be negative, no scientific determinism or divine fatalism before which man can only bow and confess himself unfree. On the contrary, it must be recognized that man's urge for freedom is subject to constraints and determinations which his vocation to be free must make him combat and rise clear of. But, to the extent that man clings to the illusion of the present that he is free, and uses the vocabulary of freedom, conceiving liberty as inalienable, or, to the extent that he holds to the conviction that all will be well though he sees that the technique actually diminishes the area of freedom, and dreams that possibilities of freedom still exist, in all these cases, his natural inertia is leading him to accept a condition of slavery and to pay for his technological happiness with his freedom. It is only by making men conscious to what degree they have become slaves and becoming happy, that there is any hope of regaining liberty by asserting themselves, perhaps at the cost of much sacrifice, over the technique which has come to dominate them. Short of attaining to such consciousness, there is no reason for any human being to lift a finger to secure mastery over his technology. Second, a second essential element consists in ruthlessly destroying the myth of technique, for example, the whole ideological construction and the tendency to consider technology something possessing sacred character. Intellectuals attempt to insert the technical phenomenon into the framework of their respective intellectual or philosophical systems by attributing to it a quality of supreme excellence, for example, when they demonstrate that technique is an instrument of freedom, or the means of ascent to historical destiny, or the execution of a divine vocation, and the like. All such constructions have the result of glorifying and sanctifying technique and of putting the human being at the disposal of some indisputable historical law or other. A further aspect of this element is the sacred, that is to say, the human tendency spontaneously to attribute sacred value to what so manifestly possesses transcendent power. Technique, in this view, is not solely an ensemble of material elements, but that which gives meaning and value to life, allowing man not only to live but to live well. Technique is intangible and unattackable precisely because everything is subject and subordinate to it. Man unconsciously invests with a holy prestige that against which he is unable to prevail. It seems to me that the only means to mastery over technique is by way of desacralization and de-ideologization. This means that all men must be shown that technique is nothing more than a complex of material objects, procedures, and combinations, which have as their sole result a modicum of comfort, hygiene, and ease, and that it possesses nothing worthy of the trouble of devoting one's whole life to it, or of commanding an excessive respect, or of reposing in one's success and honor, or of massacring one's fellow men. Men must be convinced that technical progress is not humanity's supreme adventure, but a commonplace fabrication of certain objects which scarcely merit enthusiastic delirium even when they happen to be Sputniks. As long as man worships technique, there is as good as no chance at all that he will ever succeed in mastering it. Third, a consequence of this is that, in practice, it is necessary to teach man in his employment of techniques a certain detachment, and independence with respect to them, and humor. It is naturally very difficult to accomplish this, and above all to get him to give up his illusions, not pretending to be completely free with respect to automobiles, television sets, or jobs, when the plain fact is that he is totally enslaved to them. Man must be capable of questioning at every step his use of his technical goods, able to refuse them and to force them to submit to determining factors other than the technical, say, the spiritual. He must be able to exploit all these goods without becoming unduly attached to them and without becoming convinced that even his most imposing technical conquests are to be taken seriously.
What do you think would happen if people did start to run autonomous organisations, like to collectivise, say, I don't know, initially it's businesses, schools, hospitals, and then I suppose a component of that would be you would necessarily end up breaking the law because you'd say we can't afford to pay tax anymore to this centralised institution that we don't agree with. Like,
well, if people did even the smallest steps towards that kind of economic autonomy, it would throw the macroeconomy into a recession instantly. I mean, if people just took Sabbath, 1/7 of their time to not buy and sell anything, that would throw everyone into a recession. We're all consuming so much. So I feel like the way we take power back is by deflating the whole corporate landscape. And we do that by buying less, by sharing more. In America, everybody's got, in the suburbs, everyone has their own lawnmower. It's like, why do they all have their own lawnmower? And I understand if we only have one lawnmower for the block, which is all we need, then people who work at the lawnmower company are going to lose their jobs. And old ladies who have lawnmower stock are not going to get their dividends. And so there will be disruption, but it's the only way to unwind this thing. But
But those lawnmower guys, they're losing their job anyway with AI, and the old lady would benefit from a communal system where people had a civic identity, where they maybe mow other people's lawns. It's like those values seem. I feel like one of the places one of the only places where those values have been insulated is within religious communities, and I know there's so much complexity and there are many obvious problems with religious identity, but it seems as well that precisely because it's not, at least from some perspectives, economically led, it houses a lot of human truth.
Right, and the interesting thing is if we think about this sort of sharing economy in the traditional economic terms, then like evolutionary theorists would call it reciprocal altruism. Yeah, that we're doing this all for our mutual self-interest, and because I'll take care of your child because I know someday that my child might need your. What about love? What about love? What about I do it because I love doing stuff. The interesting thing is, most of the communities I talk to about this, the resistance is not that people are not willing to share. The resistance is people are not willing to accept the favor. People are afraid. You don't let the old lady just teach you how to breastfeed. You hire the lactation consultant from the professional, company. You don't, because you're going to owe this lady something. She's going to want to come in and sing Christmas carols or something with you in Christmas time. But it's like the stuff that we, just
because I let you teach me how to breastfeed, you're not coming in here singing Cooking Wenceslas. Fuck off.
Well, really, but it is. And it's like all these experiences that we don't want to have are the things that we watch TV and wish we had. That's all the sitcom things that they do are stuff we don't do. And so it's insane.
Right, we need to create simulations of community, simulations of connection, because we've become afraid of human connection. We've become afraid of the meat and stench and wet and unreliability of humans.
Right, and that's why we prefer the robot maid, the robot girlfriend, the robot teacher to the human being. But it's precisely that stuff that we're trying to iron out. That's the stuff that makes us most human. I mean, my main critique of social media is that the way it works now is they use data about our past to put us in statistical buckets and then try to get us to behave true to our statistical profile. So if you're 80% likely to go on a diet in the next 2 months, then all of a sudden your Facebook feed will start to have oh, you're looking kind of fat, or this is what the veins of a person looks like who's not eating proper food. And they're not just doing that to try to sell you a particular diet. They're doing that to make sure you behave true to your statistical profile, to get that 80% accuracy up to 90% or 95%. But for me, it's that 20% of people who are not going to go on a diet, who are going to do something else. That's the weird, anomalous behavior. That's the messy, sticky, unpredictable stuff that makes us actually human.
Talk about more, please, Douglas, this uneasy relationship between the users of social media and the objectives and intentions of social media corporations. Somewhere, some of your content, I saw you say that a 15-year-old kid using Facebook is using it to get friends, but that is not what they're discussing at Facebook HQ. Of like, how can we make people have more friends? And
so, yeah, right. They're really thinking that, right? Oh, this poor Johnny needs more friends. How can we really make those more enduring bonds? How can we really help him meet girls and get over these, obstacles? No, they're thinking, how do we monetize Johnny's social graph, right? How do we make money off Johnny, and how do we make him a more predictable actor? And then, it's funny. I was just thinking about algorithms as demons.
How?
Like, think about we program these little things to understand our weaknesses, to figure out our exploits, and then leverage them in order to get us to do things against our own best interests automatically. That's like the definition of a demon, And here we are. We've made them. We created them.
It's interesting when you find that, as you've just done, perfect analogies for modern phenomena. In the same way that I find it interesting that in ancient technologies there are solution to modern problems. And I'm always disappointed. I know you went on Sam Harris's podcast, and I've spent time with Sam Harris also, but there is a sort of a trend to extract spiritual principles from their theological origins, and I feel that this is not good.
It's not. And, and I guess I really, I've gone through a bunch of different religions, I guess, but this book has forced me to kind of come out of the closet as someone who believes in the soul. I was thinking a lot about Aristotle, and, Aristotle, as compared to Plato kind of divided. There's like the perfect ideals up there, and then there's physical reality. And we love Plato, because then we can say, okay, you just go to church for that upper stuff, and everything's mechanical. We can, just figure out the causes and effects and science and break everything down, and that's beautiful for Plato. But Aristotle was into causes. He had the four causes. Everything else is four causes. The efficient cause is like the building of a table, or the material cause is the wood that the table comes from, and the final cause is, so that you have something to put things on. But there was this cause that nobody really fully understood called formal cause. And formal cause is like the sort of almost the essential cause, the tableness of a table, or the humanness of a human. And the formal cause of a human is soul. Is the soul. It's the only way to understand what is it that makes a human human. It's this almost pre-existing drive, and you come in with soul. And then you can explain it. You can use quantum field. Okay, so there's quantum field, and then human beings are really good at kind of creating a particular realization of infinite quantum spectrum or something. You can play around with it, and there's great scientists who will kind of back up these ideas. But in the end, it's. I used to say, well, there's something soft and squishy and ineffably wonderful about humans. Isn't there some intrinsic weird value that that human beings can maintain ambiguity over time, that they don't have to resolve things. We can stay in that liminal space between yes and no that computers can't. And we can stay in there and we can watch a David Lynch film and not understand what it means and still experience that as pleasurable. What is that unresolved place? And then, I had to realize, in the end, when push comes to shove, I can't, those are beating around the bush. That I do have to come back and finally say, yes, there is, I don't know if there's God as such, but there's a soul. There's something animating this whole thing. And soul came before matter. Soul, it really did. Time came before stuff. It's not that we had a bang that created time. No, I think time generated the bang, the soul, that there was consciousness before. Consciousness is not an emergent phenomenon of complicated matter. Matter can get complex enough that it can tap into consciousness, that we can broadcast it. I'm more into the Terence McKenna idea of DNA being like radio antennas, and then we can kind of channel consciousness. But there's a soul, sorry. And soul is always the thing that gets repressed in capitalism. Not just the soul, but soul itself. And you try to jam soul into, let's create a record label that has lots of that soul in it so we can make money off it. It's always, it's the only vital force really that we've got as humans is soul.
Gabor Mate, the sort of addiction expert, said that. I said I asked why the insistence of why you think they're so anti sort of spiritual or religious principles, and he said because if people had souls, you couldn't treat them like that. If we accepted that human beings have something essential and beautiful, then you can't have homelessness. You can't right. have kids down copper mines. You can't do that anymore.
Right. And the interesting thing is, seeing it, pictures don't convey soul for some reason. I was really interested when they're doing all this mean stuff to immigrant children coming up from Mexico and sticking them in detention centers and stuff. And there were all these pictures of it, and When there's pictures of things, the president can say, this is a they can label what the picture is. Say, oh, these are terrorists from the South. These are MS-13 robbers and rapists and killers. But someone got audio of the kids crying.
Oh.
And when people heard the audio, it happened. And I feel like sound, that's why I love podcasts, sound gets the soul on a level that seeing doesn't do it. Sound, somehow, it connects to you physically. You know, there's a vibration that's happening in your body of that sound. And I feel like that unifies us in a way that it's going to be valuable.
It's very hard, as we have, as you also say in your book, become increasingly extracted from nature to recognize those cues. Of course,
what is this supposed to be? I don't know, like when I was little, there was a big dog down the street and I was really scared of it, but like when I was with my sister, when I knew I had to protect her, like I wasn't afraid of the dog as much because I was just like, somebody was there, like I had a purpose. I feel like my parents had that, or their parents had that. Like they knew what they were supposed to be doing. I kind of felt lost. I kind of like lost that, I feel.
So when did you start working on this album?
I don't believe in albums. I don't want to do albums. No, I don't. I really don't. And I know that sounds like really lame and I think pretentious and kind of like gross. I'm just like, I don't do albums. But I don't want to do albums, especially now. If you're going to put out a body of work, it should be like an experience that's like, because we can do, it's easy to do that now. Like it's so, like, I don't think Kanye puts out records. Like he puts out like whole things. Like there's projections and there's this show that goes with it, and there's this booklet that goes with it. And it's like it's. I want to make like worlds and stories that people can live in for like years if they wanted to.
What do you think about him and like his last album and everything going on in his life right now?
I always thought he was a genius. I love Kanye. I think he's like the best. Not even just like on music level, because I try not to just be like he's a musician or like he's a rapper or like that, because I think that holds people back. I think he's one of like, he's like a prophet. He's like, he makes people like want to be better, to be better and work harder and push all of us forward. And I think it's kind of sad that people don't let him do what he wants to do, because I think he could help us a lot. I love it when he's like, you know, we're all going to die, like live like that. Like no one lives like that. We have like the ability to do that and no one does it.
It's crazy.
It's like really weird and sad to me.
But he has like no fear, so when you step into something new, there's always obviously people that are like scrutinizing or judging or whatever.
I'm probably the most insecure person I know. A lot of people feel that way. That's the thing, is like pretending like you're not like that, like that's too much work. I could never be A$AP Rocky. Like I could never be him, because like it's just too much confidence in himself. Like I'm not that. It was funny because like yesterday he kind of like he sneak dissed me, but also gave me props, but gave himself props at the same time. He was like, I know you want to be me, but it's funny because I want to be you. Which I was like, that is the most awesomest diss / awesome cool thing. But like that's the thing, I could never say that to anyone. I just don't feel that way. I feel like I'm clear. I write best in the morning.
Such recommendations must, of course, appear scandalous to contemporary eyes. To affirm that these things have no importance at all in respect to truth and freedom, that it is a matter of no real importance whether man succeeds in reaching the moon, or curing disease with antibiotics, or upping steel production, is really a scandal. As long as man does not learn to use technical objects in the right way, he must remain their slave. What I am saying refers to technique itself and not to the individual's use of individual techniques.
Right? How do we make money off Johnny, and how do we make him a more predictable actor? You know, and then, you know, it's funny. I was just thinking about algorithms as demons. You know, like, think about, we make, and I was thinking a lot about Aristotle, and, you know, Aristotle, is soul. Is the soul. It's the only way to understand what is it that makes a human human. It's this almost pre-existing drive, and you come in with soul. I mean, and then you can explain it. You can use quantum field. Okay, so there's quantum field, and then human beings are really good at kind of creating a particular realization of infinite quantum spectrum.
I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA. Cocaine quarter piece, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got power, poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA. I got hustle, though, ambition, flow inside my DNA. I was born like this and sworn like this, immaculate conception. Not transform like this, perform like this, wish out you a new weapon. I don't contemplate, I meditate, then off your fucking head. This that put the kids to bed. This that I got realness, I just kill shit cause it's in my DNA. I got millions, I got riches building in my DNA. I got dark, I got evil that rot inside my DNA. I got off, I got trouble, some heart inside my DNA. I just win again, then win again like Wimbledon I served. Yeah, that's him again, the sound that engine in is like a bird. You see fireworks and Corvette tires skirt the boulevard. I know how you work, I know just who you are. See, use a bitch, your hormones probably switch inside your DNA. Problem is, all that sucker shit inside your DNA. Daddy probably snitch, heritage inside your DNA. Backbone don't exist, born on side a jellyfish I gauge. See my pedigree, most definitely don't tolerate the front. Shit I been through probably offend you, this is Paula's oldest son. I know murder, conviction, burners, boosters, burglars, ballers, dead, redemption, scholars, fathers dead. With kids and I wish I was fed. Forgiveness, yeah. Soldier's DNA, born inside the beast. My expertise checked out in second grade. When I was 9, on sale motel, we didn't have nowhere to stay. At 29, I've done so well, hit cartwheel in my estate. And I'm gon' shine like I'm supposed to, antisocial extrovert. And excellent meaning extra work. And absentness, what the fuck you hurt? And passiveness never struck my nerve. And that's a riff gonna be this case. The reason my power's here on earth. Salute the truth when the prophets say I got loyalty, got royalty inside
This is
my
why
DNA.
I say that hip-hop has done more damage to young African Americans than racism in recent years.
I live about my fucking life. This is my heritage, all I'm inheriting. Money and power, the mecca emeritus. Tell me something, you motherfuckers can't tell me nothing. I'd rather die than to listen to you. My DNA not for imitation, your DNA an abomination. This how this where you in the matrix, dodging bullets, reaping what you're sowing, stacking up the footage, living on the go and sleeping in the villa, sipping from a Grammy, walking in the building, diamond in the ceiling, marble on the floors, beaches out the window, peeking out the window, baby in the pool, Godfather goes, only Lord knows I've been going hammer, dodging paparazzi, freaking through the cameras, eating 4 daughters, Brock wearing sandals, yoga on the Monday, stretching to November, watching all the snakes, curving all the fakes, phone never own, I don't conversate, I don't compromise, I just penetrate, sex, money, murder, these are the breaks, these are the times, level number 9, look up in the sky, tennis on the way, sinners on the way, Kenneth on the way, motherfucker, I got winners on the way, you ain't shit without a buddy on your belt, you ain't shit without a ticket on your plate, you ain't sick enough to pull it on yourself, you ain't rich enough to hit the ladder skate, tell me when destruction gonna be my fate, gonna be a fate, gonna be a fate, peace to the world, let it rotate, sex, money, murder, our DNA. I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA. Cocaine quarter piece, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got power, poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA. I got hustle, though ambition, flow.
From nature to recognize those cues. Of course, when they happen, as you've just described, we know it. I once was on holiday in Cornwall in the south of England, and we played.
There is a madness involved in urban industrial society that has to do with our lack of balance and integration with the natural environment, that this might be an interesting baseline to use for the definition of sanity as we move into the next century. Mm-hmm. That is, we need to recapture that sense of being embedded in nature, being in a condition of reciprocity with nature that you do find in traditional forms of healing. Now, I don't think we can simply adopt any other culture's conception of sanity and madness. We have to work out our own. Mm-hmm. And that, I want to suggest, is as much a job of the ecologist as it is of the therapist. Ideally, someday we wouldn't use a term like eco-psychology. Psychology would be understood to have an ecological framework. But at this point, that is still to be worked out. Do we believe that human beings are bonded to this planet in a way that would allow us to invoke trust, love, respect, reciprocity as positive motivations for becoming good environmental citizens? Or do we believe there's nothing more to fall back on than duty based upon guilt, based upon shame? So my article of faith is that at a very deep level, the human psyche is grafted to the planet out of which we evolved, that there is what I call an ecological unconscious. Mm-hmm. Is there? I'm suggesting that at a certain level of the unconscious mind, what we find is ecological wisdom, and that indeed, if that were not there, our species could not have survived and evolved as it has.
Et c'est un des aspects qui est très grave dans notre société, c'est que la technique, ayant détruit tout ce que l'homme considérait ou appelait le sacré, dans la nature, etc., eh bien l'homme est spontanément amené à regarder la technique comme du sacré. C'est ça qui est l'élément extrêmement grave. Alors, le sacré, autrefois, était toujours dans la nature, et maintenant la nature, elle est tout à fait désacralisée, et c'est la technique qui apparaît à l'homme moderne comme du sacré.
The shaman are showing how you create an archaic style culture after 5,000 years of human history, because we can't abandon technology. We have 6 billion people on this planet, but the shaman and the rave culture are showing us how we can take what was best in the society of 25,000 years ago and bring it into the center of our lives and live it again.
What happens when the verification becomes obvious? How will I know that this is being verified, that this experiment is real, that it is a form of interactive magic, that is not merely make-believe or pretending, but something that actually belongs to the most profound dynamics of the biosphere of the planet, as well as of the anima mundi, that is to say, the field of the human psyche and the collective consciousness. It's two things, my friends. It's the power of your own imagination coupled with hers.
I'm still trying to retrieve some of the hippie values, that are so disparaged now of we can do this. I refuse to think of, holding hands around the world and singing Kumbaya as a bad thing,
Right, yeah, don't let Coke own that image.
Yeah, or the naysayers, disparage that image, that a certain amount of naivete is appropriate right now.
I don't know much about Tim Leary or Ram Dass and that sort of period where American academics became interested in mysticism through psychedelics. You are connected to that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Because in America, they, the birthplace of this kind of capitalism, I guess. It's almost like they did need medicine, which is what these things were. Certainly, after they did their mushrooms and stuff, they synthesized. They did Albert Hoffman's LSD, and that was the molecule, which is much more like a medicine than a message from the planet. You do ayahuasca or mushrooms, there's personality there. There's something talking to you. You do acid, and it's just like, going to the ideal psychotherapist, white room mirrors of your own psyche. There's no message in it other than the echoes of your own, childhood or neuroses or whatever they are. It's a great experience, but it's a different. It's sort of two. I see them as two very, very different things. Where the American movement, I think, kind of fell was, at Esalen on the West Coast. They really worshipped Maslow. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this idea that, you move up the hierarchy of needs until at the top you have self-actualization. And where self-actualization becomes the goal, it just dovetailed so perfectly with American personal salvation and Protestantism. I'm going to get awakened. It's like, what do you mean you're going to get awakened? Well, what about everybody? You're going to get...
It's synonymous with power, isn't it? It's just like, I'm going to become ultimately powerful. It's like it's being framed in sort of spiritual language.
Right.
But it is, in essence...
self-help. Yeah. And while, I understand you need to have enough integrity as an organism to engage with the others. These were people driving their Saabs to Esalen, and sitting in the hot tubs and getting... a little Buddhism between their stock trades, and it was a very different thing. And I feel like some of the opportunity was lost.
We're not comfortable with sacrifice, are we? We don't like the idea. That's another thing that Gandhi said in that sort of some speech where he said about the 70,000 villages. He said, and this is obviously in the 40s, whatever, we're going to have to let go of our attachment to comforts. We're going to have to let go of our attachment to gadgets and trinkets. And... otherwise it does just become a commodified spiritual experience where you go to a spa, which, God, what a lovely thought. Go into a spa, hot tub, nice massage, all of these sort of sensual experiences. But if there's not some kind of connection, then what is it really? It becomes somehow quite vapid.
Right. I mean, then it's really it's the expression of some essential fear. I saw. Did you see they did the re-release of 2001 of Kubrick?
I didn't know that.
They remastered the whole thing. Christopher Nolan supervised this project, so you get to see it in 70 millimeter the way it was originally. And I had forgotten, the whole first third of that movie is the little monkey people running around and stuff. And there's this scene where the monkey people, it's at night, and they're sitting under this little cliff, and they should be sleeping, right? But they're all like this because you hear in the background, there's some saber-toothed tiger walking around, and they're just, waiting for this. And I thought, how many nights over how many hundreds of thousands of years did people sit just in abject fear? And how deep is that, right? In our cellular memory. Huh. So I feel like that fear is animating so much of our... Okay, I'm going to get a house here. No, now we're going to move to that neighborhood. Now we're going to get more of this. Now I'm going to get a better car. Now I'm going to... that it's playing on our fear of the lack of predictability, and our fear of the unknown, and fear of getting jumped or whatever it is. And it's I just want to keep telling people, you're safe. It's safe. It's okay. You're safe. And if they felt genuinely safe, then they wouldn't need these other sort of really signifiers of safety.
Right. Walls. I'm glad we recorded you saying it's safe, because I might extract that and put it as an app on my phone and just put it on a loop. You're safe. You're safe. Because you've got a nice way of talking. Plus, were you an actor when you were hanging out with them actors? You're good at doing the mimes and everything.
I was a director. I mean, I was going to do mime a lot. I was good in that, but then I just hated mimes as people.
Oh, God, I'm going to become one of them.
Exactly. I'm not going to do that. But no, I was a theater kid from 11. I was going to...
So you always know that in advance.
Definitely. That's that nature comes from the skills of
loving to write in school and knowing how to engage the listener, and knowing where I'm going to land it, or where where it's going to end, or where it's not going to end. That's always been something I was always unique about and really focused on. Where does this thing go? And I have that premeditated in the process of pushing the lyrics.
Earliest memory of music?
Being in the living room and watching We Want Easy.
How old would you say you were?
I had to be 4, maybe. I actually said this before. Him busting out, it was a scene where he bust out of jail on stage, and he's rapping his verse. That's my earliest memories, I think. Then after that, it would be Snoop Dogg's Nothing But a G Thing. I was heavy into music videos. This when the box was out. You had to order. They constantly ordered, so the song was coming on back to back, and I just sit in front of the tube and just watch it back to back to back to back. Alone, my parents playing it every night. They partied. They partied every night, literally.
And films or television shows that mean a lot to you, or you?
Oh yeah, definitely. All those things play a part to the start of my imagination.
Any particular ones you remember?
I used to look on the tube. It could be from Dennis to Menace. It could be from, what was I watching? Fresh Prince. All these things constructed my imagination of what was outside of the actual house that I was living in, or the neighborhood I was in. Because I'm looking at these figures. These figures almost are like, imaginary. You're looking at Will Smith as the Fresh Prince. He's actually a real person, but as a kid, you see him in the TV screen. So to me, I should say, he's almost like a character in a sense. When I look at Michael Jackson, still to this day, Michael Jackson is the biggest imaginary character for me. Because I know.
Star rather than stay true to this idea of essence.
Right. I mean, and there's a few people who can kind of, which is interesting, who can move, like a Meryl Streep or someone, who can actually...
mutate through different energy fields.
And really, and somehow, and it's just brilliant, but she can then embody an archetype. It's...
Yes.
That's really hard.
Now for another mad tangential.
But theater-wise, I was a director. I was a theater director till I was like 33.
Know a lot about story.
Yeah, but that was what got me fed up with it. Was every play had to have an ending. At first it was only the wealthy who were coming. And it's like, when am I going to do cultural transformation? I can't do Brecht for the rich. That didn't work.
Brecht for the stinking rich wasn't satisfying.
$70 to see my 3-penny opera. It's like, doesn't make sense. So and then the internet happened, and I was like, oh, this is going to be the people's medium. It was all interactive, and I thought it would be theatrical. Which it almost was, but it wasn't. I mean, the CD-ROM era was a little bit, entered into these worlds, and remember the early games like Myst, and different screens would come. You'd move around. It was that early kind of virtual reality web felt like an ideal form for a theater director. It was a little architectural, maybe, but you were moving through spaces, creating experiences.
I see. It felt explorative, and it could be narrativized rather than sort of a nihilistic, corporatized, commodifying threshing machine. Another thing I would ask you is, you mentioned in the book 12-step process, the 12-step process. I'm a 12-step person, and you talk about it in terms of we almost need to use an addict model to free ourselves from our attachment to materialism and our particular type of consumer culture.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. First, because the platforms we're using are intentionally addictive. Right? They take the algorithms from Las Vegas slot machines and put them in our social media feeds.
Oh, they literally use those.
They literally use it. There's a book called Hooked by Ellul, which is about how to do that. How to create addictive technologies.
Where it has to work this many times and then it doesn't work that many times. Like you have to have that many hits per pulse.
Exactly. You find the obsessive rhythm, or there's a department at Stanford called Captology Department, run by B.J. Fogg. Fogg. And captology is exactly what it sounds like. How do you make technologies that capture people? And I met the guy.
Oh my God, that's evil.
I met the guy who was one of his students, who then used those ideas to develop the streak feature on Snapchat. Where you show how many days that you've had consistent conversations, and like teenage girls are just hooked on it. Oh, we've 107 days. If you miss one day, we go back down to 0.
I was about to feel superior to those teenage girls before I realised on my meditation app, like sometimes it tells me, and it is 107 days, curiously. I sort of, even sometimes I meditate without the app. I can meditate. I know TM. I learned that from the David Lynch Foundation, as a matter of fact. But I feel sort of bound to the app. Oh no, I can't have it go back to 1.
Well, at least it's trying to, right. You're trying to use and that's fine, using some external thing to encourage it. But the addiction of, as you would know from addiction works not by satisfying the need, but by not satisfying the need, so you go back. So your social interactions online, your Skype conversations and FaceTime, they lack the fidelity that you need to actually connect with another person. But you don't blame the technology for that. You blame the other person. You blame, because we haven't evolved to understand that this is a mediated exchange, so of course I'm not. Your body doesn't feel that. But you, even though you blame them, you end up then addicted. You go back for more. Why didn't I get that? Why didn't it really? As you know from a drug, it never quite fills. It never quite hits that spot.
In 12-step theology, the idea is that the reason it doesn't do that is because the craving that you actually feel is a spiritual one, a yearning for connection, and you're using facsimiles and anesthetics to defer your suffering, because you don't know how to form a meaningful spiritual connection.
And that's a spiritual connection that some of our leading scientists and intellectuals are telling us doesn't exist.
Why are they so determined? Why is that such a sort of a potent movement? Even people that I admire and like the cosmologist Brian Cox, he always sort of starts off saying, science is not the domain of spirituality, and I'm cool with everything. But then later he says stuff like, if you can't measure it, it's not there.
Right.
They're we know every bit of energy that's in an arm.
Because these scientists, just like today's economists who are trapped in 13th century economic operating systems, today's scientists are trapped in Francis Bacon-style reductionist science, breaking it apart. So you look at the human in terms of their pieces, but you don't have any sense of the vital whole. So if you understand anatomy or the human being as the liver and the this and the that, you miss the whole thing. Only now are doctors starting to realize, the connective tissue is actually where it's at.
All right. Because if you said, I really want to meet Marlon Brando, and then someone goes, yeah, all right, and then they bought in his foot, and then one of his kidneys, and there's one of his balls, some hair we shaved off him, we're going to get all of it. No, I want the experience of Brando.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you get the movie, which again is not... That's why we've got to, and I do think that's what it comes down to, is standing up for that there is something essential about human. Again, the intellectuals, they were giving me crap years ago. They said, that's essentialist. I was arguing something. And it was like, it's this bad thing. And it's like, there's essence? Why is that the bad thing? But yeah, it's a kind of
Are they
science.
Afraid of love? What are they afraid of?
Right, but if you read, and I quoted him in there, it's the only person I've really quoted in this book, Francis Bacon, when he invented the scientific revolution, he's talking about nature as this woman that you hold down and rape.
Francis, mate, no.
But that's what science was. We're going to nature, she will submit to us.
That's the wrong attitude. Get in harmony with nature.
Right.
Francis was right, and so that within it is the idea of dominion, although that is also a religious idea. It's to say God gave man dominion over the beast. But like that in itself, I'm sure, was being utilised. That's a repurposing of religious ideas. One thing I would want to say to like atheist, materialist people that believe solely or primarily in mechanical models is that I want to say, when people believed the earth was flat, when people believed the sun went around the earth, like that, they really believed that. What do you imagine are the beliefs that we currently hold that we will learn were illusory and temporary? My assumption is that we will learn that consciousness itself operates in ways that we can't understand, that it connects us to one another, that it can transmit and receive information that we don't understand, that it can't be fabricated and created. Not, intelligence is one thing, consciousness is another. And I feel that why would we want to, why not live as if there is essence? Why not live as if there is God? Why not live as if beauty and love are things to aspire to? And I suppose because if you do all that, you challenge the interests of the powerful, you start to dismantle corporations, nation states, privileged elites. That is one of the things that would definitely happen, and I think it might be the defining thing that prevents new narratives emerging that empower human beings, that stop us competing through illusory, temporary, individualized motifs and models of what it is to be human instead of team human.
Yeah. And I think people eventually, that's what we'll realize is that, oh my God, we thought we were individuals. Isn't that funny? Remember back when people thought that they were individual? That, remember back when people thought that lying worked?